This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news. Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more. The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Lisa Mateo off this week.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's probably...
What's plan B here?
Children, athletics.
Okay.
I think that's her typical thing.
Okay.
John Tucker darkens the door to help us out through the entire week. We're thrilled with that. None of us are off. It's a working August week for us, and busy markets as well. Here's how strange this is. Oil surging.
I know.
I'm out with a map. From Tripoli east towards Egypt is about 500 miles.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that. I'm
East Libya is arguing with West Libya.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of oil there, Tom. So, I mean, we need to get some clarity over there because we've got Brent crude higher here today, up about 2.5%. $81 a barrel. In
West Texas, $77 a barrel. We'll go to John Tucker and what it costs to feed the Hummer with gasoline at Wawa. We'll get to that sometime during the show. Green on the screen. What a surprise. Nvidia, we're steeled, I say, for Nvidia this week.
Wednesday after the close time, we'll hear from Nvidia. And it's not just for Nvidia or for the tech space. It seems like as Nvidia goes, so does this market here as you think about some of the performance in 2023 and 2024.
I don't know what to make of it. I do know what to make of yields. And, I'm going to start, folks, with a 10-year real yield, 1.66%, changed by Jay Powell, really buttressed down on lows that we've seen in months and months and months. Well, Paul, the mortgage, the housing markets,
I'm looking at
up here.
Yeah, the mortgage back, the 30-year fixed, 6.5% here. Yeah. It's been moving lower over the last several weeks. So I wonder what happens when it goes below 6. Will people start, moving, selling some of their existing homes? We
welcome all of you on Android Auto, on Apple CarPlay as well. On YouTube, you go out, you search for Bloomberg Podcasts. Please subscribe. Building every week. We're humbled by the international growth of YouTube. That's where to see us live. Paul Sweeney, Paul looks better than me on YouTube. I mean, it's just,
It's all the lighting. It's all the lighting.
It's the lighting as well. John Tucker looks better with all of us. From the Interactive Broker Studios, with our Bloomberg Business Flash, John Tucker.
All right, following a strong week for stocks, futures right now point to a higher open on Wall Street. Of course, Fed Chairman Powell pretty much indicating rate cut baked into the cake for the September meeting as the focus shifts from inflation to the other part of the dual mandate, jobs. S&P 500 right now about 0.5% below its record close. 56.67, that's the number to watch for today. Nvidia, most active pre-market, up just about 1% as it gets set to report earnings, as you mentioned, Paul, midweek. Crude oil on the rise, chalk that up to the usual suspects. Brent crude, the international benchmark, up just about $2, 81.01 a barrel. Gold extending a rally above $2,500 an ounce. And, of course, on the calendar this morning, we're going to get a reading on durable goods. Thursday, we get initial jobless claims. And Friday, of course, the Fed's preferred inflation measure. Dow futures 49 points higher. S&P E-mini futures up 11, and the NASDAQ futures right now 25 points higher. 2-year yield down about 3 basis points, 388. The 10-year, that's unchanged, 379. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul, Tom.
John, thanks so much. Joining us now from Dubai, Anhar Lebanon, Jumana Bertesh joins us, host of Bloomberg Horizons on Bloomberg Television. Jumana, describe the view south from Beirut. If you go south from Beirut to the border with Israel, this is where the territory is overnight of a battle. What does it look like?
Geographically, or what does the situation look like right now?
I'll take both.
It's a beautiful stretch of land because it's by the Mediterranean Sea, and actually would have in the past been a tourism destination hub. Many people would have enjoyed going to the beaches in the south, but of course the situation has changed, and we have been in a very different environment, I would say, since October 7, because as we've spoken about over the course of the last couple of months, there has been daily crossfire, daily exchange of fire between between Hezbollah, who are located in southern Lebanon, with northern Israel. And of course, the attacks started getting worse and worse. And then things really came to a head with the killing of that senior commander, the Hezbollah commander Fuad Shukr, towards the end of July. And the region, specifically Lebanon, has been sitting on edge ever since then, waiting to see what that retaliation was going to look like. And of course, we had heard from Hezbollah several times in the course of the last couple of weeks saying that they did plan a revenge attack, and that came over the weekend. So, we can talk about that. But what I would say is the feeling in Lebanon today versus where it was, let's say, a couple of days ago, is almost one of relief in that it could have been a lot worse.
Jumana, there's also peace talks going on at the same time, which seems kind of, unusual to think about in the context of this attack. What's the status of the peace talks?
The ceasefire discussions, you mean specifically
Yes.
as it relates to Gaza? Yeah. So what's interesting is several hours after the Israel-Hezbollah attacks and counterstrikes on the course of very early Sunday morning, a couple of hours later, an Israeli delegation actually made their way to Cairo to continue with these ceasefire discussions that had been taking place alongside the CIA director, the Egyptian intelligence chief, and the Qatari prime minister. So very high-level delegation. Hamas opted out. They decided not to attend after what had happened over the course of the weekend, though there had been some low-level Hamas representatives who participated in some of the later discussions but weren't present at the table. But the point is, it's twofold. Number one, Israel didn't see the attack on Sunday morning as one that would necessarily impede these ceasefire discussions. And number two, there is still a lot of political pressure from the international community, from within the U.S. administration, to get this ceasefire deal across the line. One of the sticking points that comes up is the presence along the Philadelphia corridor, that is the border between Egypt and Gaza. Israel wants to continue to have a presence there. Egypt and Hamas say that that is a red line.
Jumana, thank you so much. Jumana Batessi from Dubai this morning, the host of Horizons on Bloomberg Television across all of the Middle East. We turn to the markets right now. Paul, let's go to the 2-year Sweeney yield. And the answer is Dan Scully knows it's 3.90, distant from where it was pre-Powell's speech.
Exactly. Dan Scully joins us, Managing Director, Head of Equity Model Portfolio Solutions at Morgan Stanley Wealth Management. Dan, thanks so much for joining us here. What was your takeaway from Fed Chairman Powell and what we heard last week in Jackson Hole?
Good morning, Paul. Good morning, Tom. The biggest takeaway is that Powell is now much more focused on labor. He mentioned we don't think labor is going to be the source of inflationary pressures, and that he is focused on labor and growth. And frankly, Paul, if you go back a few weeks ago in what now feels like the blink and you missed it, correction plus rally, it feels like the markets now are all more squarely focused on growth and employment.
So I guess one of the questions for a lot of people is, okay, I get that. We're going to have some rate easing going forward. We're not sure the scope and the timing. Earnings, in fact, are pretty solid. How do I play this equity space these days? Do I stick with the big names? We're going to get Nvidia Wednesday after the close, or do I try to broaden out and find valuations elsewhere?
For new money, Paul, you're doing more of the latter. We think the opportunity set outside of the Magnificent Seven over the next year or so is about as strong as it's been in a long time. Part of it is due to broadening out in earnings, and you saw an element of that in this past reporting season, but we expect the compression of Magnificent Seven earnings coming down and the 493 earnings, of course, coming up to continue over the next 2 quarters, 4 quarters. And then, of course, now just this ultimate market confirmation of the Fed cutting in its still positive economy is good for more value in cyclical parts of the market.
Dan, too short a visit. We'll do it longer next time. Let's get Dan Scully. Bob, let's get Dan Scully on here in a couple days. It's unfair to him to be this short this morning. Mr. Scully is with Morgan Stanley. Futures up 9. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Tom, Paul, John, thank you very much. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are set to return to the campaign trail this week. Harris is kicking off a bus tour in Georgia. Former President Trump plans to head to Michigan. Meanwhile, Republican and Democratic lawmakers are pushing their candidates. Republican Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas.
You would have thought, watching the Democratic convention last week, that the Democrats are not in office, that they're not in power, that they're campaigning against an incumbent Republican, when in reality, she's been part of the failures of the Biden-Harris administration for 4 years.
Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont.
People are growing tired and fatigued with Trump's consistent and outrageous lies. And I think no matter what people may think of Kamala Harris, I think they want stability in the White House.
Both senators spoke on ABC's This Week, heard Sundays on Bloomberg. The Middle East is on edge once again after what Israel is calling a preemptive strike on Hezbollah, taking out thousands of missile launchers in southern Lebanon. The U.S. is monitoring the situation. We get more with Bloomberg News Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Bronner in Tel Aviv.
10, 11 months of this has led to a kind of weird routine quality, which is that anytime there's a flare-up, there's a sense that it is going to spin out of control, and indeed it might, and so far it hasn't. There is a growing sense that maybe there's a kind of a choreographed containment underway that still could explode, but for the moment, both Hezbollah and Israel and Iran apparently have decided to keep it within a certain set of rules of engagement.
Bloomberg News Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Bronner. Finally, Lake Mary, Florida, won the Little League World Series, beating Chinese Taipei 2-1. Global news, 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg Tom Paul John.
Just quickly, I was a catcher who made that throw to first base, and there was no first baseman there.
I know.
I did that for Chilson's Pharmacy a long time ago.
Boy, I felt bad. I was I saw the throw, and I'm like,
I have so been there.
Man, there's no one there.
It scarred me for life. We got to talk. We're going to do this. We'll do it again here. But Paul, I thought the speech by Powell was incredibly important.
Yep.
I'd predicted they would somehow talk about Fed independence. Here's the quote. We'll show this on YouTube. On radio, I will read it. We will be open to criticism and new ideas while preserving the strengths of our framework. The limits of our knowledge, so clearly evident during the pandemic, demand humility and a questioning spirit focused on learning lessons from the past and applying them flexibly to our current challenges. 20 years from now, Paul, they're going to be talking about that quote from the chairman of the Federal Reserve.
Because it was a significant speech there, Tom, out in Jackson Hole, really, I think, cementing to the market that, in fact, this Fed is ready to make that pivot. Now, just the questions are, how quickly does the Fed move, in what manner? But clearly, the Fed chairman really signaled clearly where the Fed wants to go.
In this political season, it was a delicate statement, indirect statement of independence. I didn't expect him to be bold about that, but that perfectly got the tone. We'll feature that again here across the 3 hours of Bloomberg Surveillance. What are you doing? Are you here Friday?
Of course not. It's a Friday in the summer. Well, it's Friday in the summer.
John,
I'm not here
tomorrow.
It's the Friday before Labor Day. You think Paul's going to be here?
Exactly. I'm not going to be here tomorrow.
Michael, are you going to be here Friday?
I'll be here Friday.
All the old serious radio people, they're in on Friday.
Yeah,
Us posers, we're out. But I will be at the U.S. Open tomorrow.
Really?
With Molly Smith. She'll be reporting live.
Are you kidding me? Are you in the stadium?
I'm in the stadium.
Can Mrs. Keene tag along?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to have fun.
She just wants to go to the store and get some merch.
Oh, they've got plenty of merch. And they're not giving it away.
Bloomberg Radio with our coverage of the U.S. Open from Paul Sweeney, Carol Masser, and others. It's Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. After last week's stock rally, futures this morning indicate a higher open. Dow futures right now up 45 points, up 0.1%. S&P E-mini futures 9 points higher. That's up 0.2. And the Nasdaq futures right now 7 points higher. And in the commodity space, Brent crude, the international benchmark, that's up about 2.6%, above $81. NYMEX crude, 76.82 a barrel. That is up 2.5% right now. And gold continues its run. COMEX gold right now, $25.59.50 an ounce. Again, above, maintaining its stance above $2,500 an ounce. Nvidia, most active pre-market, that's up 0.6%. In addition to Nvidia, earnings reports expected later this week from Salesforce, CrowdStrike Holdings, Dell, HP. And as we wrap up earnings season so far, 80% of the companies in the S&P 500 that have opened their books so far, 80% have delivered positive earnings surprises. And crossing the Bloomberg just now, Canada imposing new tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, steel, and aluminium. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. This is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
We got an Irish dude.
I just wanted to see if you're awake.
You did that for Darmeyer.
Yeah, exactly.
Aluminium, thank you so much. John took care. What do we got right now? Here's what we got. Paul Sweeney off 8 filled fun days in Ireland.
Yes.
You're going to land. Darmeyer with his surveillance tour guide.
Yep.
You're going to land. Are you going to go up and then down into the westernmost tippy Dunmore Head?
I think so. We're landing in Dublin. We're going to spend a couple days there, then go north up into Northern Ireland, spend a couple days up there, and then kind of go west, and then come down the western
coast.
Yeah. So that's going to be
like,
nice.
It's like 912% of Ireland is in Dublin and Belfast, and the rest is just incredibly remote, right?
Yeah, it is, and it definitely has that vibe. And I think you're really going to like the west coast of Ireland because
Yep.
you just got the Atlantic coast coming all the way across.
Where's the favorite spot of Darmeyer in Ireland?
Well, I'm biased. I grew up in Dublin. My brothers are still there. But as a tourist, west of Ireland, Galway,
Yep.
yeah, that's pretty
And by the
cool.
way, they love me in Ireland, by the way.
Why?
Sweeney? I mean,
Oh,
it's
yeah,
like,
that would
please,
do it.
come on.
Yeah, but not as much as
Why?
Tucker because he uses aluminium, so he's already like he's there. He's a native.
In Mayfair. Darmeyer joins us right now, surveillance Irish correspondent, and of course with HSBC Foreign Exchange. What does the weak dollar signal? Is it the horse or the cart?
I'm curious. It's a good question. I think it's weird. The market seems to want to dislike the dollar, right? And so for a period, they said, well, the reason to dislike the dollar is the U.S. is heading into recession. And they said, well, actually, no, it's not. Now the reason to dislike the dollar is because the U.S. heading for a soft landing. And it feels like it's gotten beaten up the last couple of months. I think it's ready for a bounce. I think it's ready for consolidation. We've constructed a narrative that fitted the price action. But really, is the U.S. economy in such bad shape? I'm not convinced.
I mean, Euro near 112. Others, Jeffrey U, BNY Mellon, looking for a solid move to 105. But is it regression to the mean, or is it philosophically HSBC bets on a resilient dollar?
Certainly on the resilience of the dollar, because I don't think the Fed will cut by as much as being priced in. So that's part A. Part B is if you look at the dollar, even relative to those dovish expectations, it's cheap. I mean, it is weaker than that rate would imply. And then I always come back to the question is like, I mean, I joked with you, why will I like you in Ireland? But why do people like the euro? And you kind of go, well, it's not the dollar. But I think that only gets you so far, right? And if you actually go, why do I like the euro? It feels like a pretty short conversation. So I think that's also part of the rationale for why you can get back to 105 in euro dollar.
It seems like the pound sterling's done almost even a little bit better versus the dollar than the euro. What's the feeling about pound sterling these days?
Mixed. I mean, actually, I was in the UK for the last 3 weeks, partly on holiday, partly in the office, and I was speaking to the traders on the desk, and they said, they said they're tempted to kind of buy euro sterling on the cross, right? So they want to take the dollar out of the equation because they don't have a high conviction around it. So I think there is a sense that perhaps sterling is looking a little bit stretched. But see, the difference there is you can at least look at sterling and go, okay, I can understand why you're buying it. You know, its yield is a little higher than the US. The numbers haven't been bad. Numbers out of the Eurozone have been really poor for pretty much 3 months now, relative to expectations. Another soft eye for this morning. So sterling I kind of get. I mean, I think it's overshot, but at least I can kind of go, why do people like sterling? Okay, I can see why you might. I disagree.
Japanese yen. What are your thoughts, the most recent thoughts? I'm not sure what the Bank of Japan's doing, but what's happening with the yen here?
I think it's behaving itself, really. For a few months, what we saw with at least with dollar yen, was it just went way higher than the yield differentials would typically have implied, right? And we've closed that gap now, 144. Our older readers would know that's gross. But that's where we're at, okay? And that's about right for the 10-year yield gap where it sits. So unless you think something weird is going to happen on treasuries or weird is going to happen in JGBs, I think we're in a holding period for dollar yen, I would have thought.
I look at the dollar weakness, and of course all of it comes with what EM's doing. Where's the big figure opportunity to make a trade? You're sitting in Hong Kong, HSBC, and somebody wants to speculate on a big figure move. Is there a pair that makes sense?
Well, it's not in Asia. I mean, the one I like at the moment is buying the dollar against the Swiss franc.
Interesting. Why? Explain that.
Well, the Swiss franc has been one of the best performing currencies in G10 over the last couple of months. So it's now looking quite rich relative to its rates or its interest rate dynamic. Secondly, inflation in Switzerland has been undershooting where the SNB thought it would land. So how much tolerance does the SNB have for a stronger Swiss franc under that kind of condition? So you put that the Swiss leg. I've already described our feelings around the US dollar. So yeah, it's not one of the most glamorous ones, but start of this year, the world loved selling Swiss franc. I used to call it the Taylor Swift trade. Everyone wanted to talk about it and do it, and that was the trade of the day. Whereas now I think we might be the other way around. I think that it's not that way necessarily.
I have to go to Western Ireland. Are you doing $3,975 a night? The Guinness Boathouse at Ashford Castle. Dara, have you done an HSBC function?
I should actually confess, I spent part of my honeymoon at Ashford Castle.
You did?
There you
but
go.
not $3,750 a night, I can tell you.
Why did I know this? It goes back to 1228. The Sweeneys were there in 1675.
Exactly.
It's a castle, and it's gorgeous.
It is gorgeous.
They got the little bicycles outside the Guinness Boathouse. John Tucker, that's what they name it, the Guinness Boathouse. It's got to be. I mean, I don't know if the Guinness own it.
Did John Wayne? I think he may have shot a movie there.
Or Mel Gibson. One of the two. Are you kidding me? $4,000 a night, free Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. There you go.
Ashford Castle, it's sort of kind of like west of Dublin on the way to New York. Dara Meyer, thank you so much with HSBC for getting us started. Some important messages in there about this move in the dollar. You see it on DXY, 100, I can't believe I'm saying that, 100.82, 105.432, 100, a 99 print on DXY would be a weak dollar. Sterling, 131.88. The euro is the number one watch, 111.67 would be it. Dara, thank you again so much. I mean, Paul, the foreign exchange is for tourists like us, it's like a big deal.
You got to pay attention to this
I'm
stuff.
going to Rome in October, and I'm sorry,
Oh, boy.
112 euro doesn't get it done.
The euro 1.11 here, a little bit weaker here today, but these currencies are the euro, the pound sterling, they've rallied 4 or 5% just over the last couple months against the U.S. dollar.
We haven't talked about Chinese yuan with all the challenges of China. Stronger currency there, not necessarily good. 7.1186. That was 725, something like that. To go under a 7 yuan to a 695, strong renminbi would be challenging for China, I would assume, with all their other problems. Paul and I are watching Brent crude, $81 a barrel, up $2. Libya, a spat between Tripoli and West Libya and over to the Egyptian border. Two separate Libyas arguing
I didn't know that.
about oil. Well, it's like it's there in your head and then it's not.
Yeah, and of course, Bloomberg has people on the ground reporting for us from Ethiopia. I mean, how good is that?
Yeah, we'll have to see. The VIX, 16.07. Futures up 9. Dow futures up 44. A 5,700 on SPX.
Yeah.
I'm not there yet, but we're sort of out there. We're looking. We're here for a full week of Bloomberg Surveillance on economics, finance, investment. September 3rd, Boston, Bloomberg. 92.9 FM, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom, with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Investors still assessing the implications of Fed policy following Chair Jerome Powell's dovish tilt. We are adding to last week's rally with a rate cut on the horizon. S&P futures right now up 7 points, up about 0.1%. The Dow futures up 42 points. That's 0.1% rise. Right now, the NASDAQ E-mini futures, they actually have turned lower. They were down just 2 points right now. Traders adding to bets on half a point of rate cuts in September. And then you have fears of escalating conflict in the Mideast. That's prompting some haven buying. Crude oil advancing more than 2%. Gold extending a rally above $2,500 an ounce. Highlights of this week include, of course, Nvidia earnings. We're going to get those on Wednesday after the close of regular trading. Initial jobless claims Thursday, and the PCE price data that comes on Friday. NYMEX crude right now, $76.93 a barrel. That is up close to 3% at this point. Same for Brent crude. That's above $81 a barrel right now. 2-year yield is unchanged, 3.90. The 10-year unchanged right now at 380. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene. Paul nails it, talking about this debate to come. What date is it? September 10th?
10th, I think.
10th is
Yeah.
as well. Henrietta Trace joins us now. She's been such a value at Veda Partners on the campaign and where we are. Henrietta, I want to triangulate this. Charlie Cook, a couple days ago, wrote an absolutely brilliant short essay for the National Journal. And for Republicans, Democrats, those in the middle, adversity will come. Can Harris's team deal with it better than Trump's? It's a brilliant, balanced essay, Henrietta, on the reality of the Electoral College and that Trump is by no means out of this race, given the present enthusiasms of the Democratic Party. How should Mr. Trump approach the debate, and how should his campaign advisors, led by Susie Wiles, how should they advise him if he's not listening to them?
Yeah, I don't envy them that position, as you can see from his Truth Social post and his own statements at rallies, his call in to various news outlets. Staying on message, focusing on policy is obviously a real problem for the candidate. I think heading into the debate, what you're seeing behind the scenes right now is a real amount of agita from the Republican camp, arguing over whether or not the mic should be on permanently or whether they should be muted when the candidate is not talking. What's most notable right now is that Trump is saying or the Trump campaign is saying we want the mics muted, as opposed to in 2020 when they wanted it free for all. I think there's a lot of consternation. But to your earlier point about the Electoral College, they are holding on and they're in the lead in the Electoral College vote count.
And Paul, here's the sentence from Charlie Cook, the money sentence. Democrats will likely, quote, waste, unquote, about 4 or 5 million votes running up the score in California, New York, Illinois, and other reliably blue states.
So, Henrietta, what do you, if you were advising former President Trump, what would be your advice to him here? Because it seems like Kamala Harris coming out of the convention has some pretty decent momentum.
I would say get on the campaign trail. Right now, there's no event scheduled for Trump until Thursday. I would like to see that change. If I was the Trump campaign, I want the candidate out there every single day in every swing state, shore up Georgia and North Carolina. Don't take anything for granted. The galvanization you're seeing on the Democratic side is unparalleled. Record-breaking fundraising that is shattering everything that the Trump camp did and has been able to do all year. $86 million for the Harris campaign just last week. And that compares to, I think, $63 million for the entire month of July for the Trump campaign. So I'd say get out there early and often. Don't waste a day.
So, Henrietta, despite you just highlighted or cited the momentum by the Democrats, yet your research, you say with 60% odds, we anticipate former President Trump will win the election. So it appears, I guess, from your analysis that the momentum is not going to be enough for Kamala Harris?
It's just not enough yet. It's a pretty nuanced point I'm trying to make. They are not out of the woods. There's a couple dynamics here. Number one, the Electoral College, as Tom pointed out at the jump, that favors Republicans overwhelmingly because Democrats do waste a ton of their votes in California and New York. It is the middle of the country that decides the election, just a handful of swing states. So Harris is making material strides, but she is 6-7 points behind where Joe Biden was at this time in 2020. And she's even 5 points behind where Hillary Clinton was in 2016. Yeah. There's one really good reason for that. And that could be that there's no longer a silent Trump voter, which is what we have to factor in, what I factor into my Electoral College forecast. So I don't want to be confusing about my odds. Right now, Trump is in the lead, but his lead is slipping away fast.
1992. James Carville. It's great to see Mr. Carville donned in the LSU garb, pontificating as all of politics. Listen carefully. It's the economy, stupid. In the voting booth, Henrietta Trace, is it really about the economy?
Not recently, no. It's about abortion. In 2022, inflation was 9%. 8%, 7% in the 2 months leading up to the election. What happens? Republicans got shellacked. It's because of abortion. There's a major gender divide in America, and that's going to drive voter turnout. And women vote substantially more than men, sometimes by 6 percentage points in a state like Michigan. And there's a 12% gap between Harris supporters and Trump supporters in the gender vote.
So I think you already answered the question, but let's redux it. Is there a gender gap normal or equivalent to other states in the select swing states, or are they different?
The gender gap is in every single state, with the exception of Nevada, where it's a little bit less pronounced, but every other state, it is profound. And it's most striking. There's some new data out this weekend about the youth male demographic, specifically young men who skew much more Republican than even their older peers over the age of 35. So I think that's a particular source of strength for Trump.
Will they vote?
Well, they don't usually, but this is going to be a record turnout election cycle, which is a change from when Biden was at the top of the ticket. 70% of the time in American elections, we break a record. And this is very much looking like one where we'll break the records again.
I don't have the numbers in front of me, Paul. I did them like 10 days ago, but Biden's popular vote in 2020 was 17% larger than Obama's popular vote in 2008.
Okay. Wow.
It's some unimaginable jump, and Ms. Trey's saying we're going to get even more than that.
Henrietta, is this the new normal in American national politics where it comes down to just a handful of swing states? I don't remember this as a kid.
Good question.
It absolutely is the new normal. I think what Harris has done really impressively is open up the map. So now instead of just talking about Nevada and Arizona and the typical Rust Belt states, now we're really concentrating on North Carolina and Georgia, again, states that Joe Biden was able to win and Chuck Schumer was able to carry in the United States Senate, not twice, but in 4 specific elections in terms of runoffs in the state of Georgia. So whether it's Stacey Abrams doing the work down there to get voters out to the polls and their voter turnout efforts, you cannot underappreciate that. I think it's worth spending time on mail-in balloting, not to segue too far, but that's going to make the difference in this election potentially because the narrow margins in this nation being so polarized is a really big deal.
Let's put a bow on it, Henrietta Trey's. Are we going to see a debate September 10?
I don't see any way that the former president can back away from the debate at this point. I think that there is some real question about, whether or not they'll have the rules set the same way they were under Biden, but there has to be a debate. So I think it will proceed.
Henrietta Trey's, thank you so much with Veda Partners. Can we ever run 8 days a week?
I think we can. Absolutely.
I mean, there's huge value.
I mean, the news flow coming out of this campaign, it's such a compressed campaign, Tom. I mean, just going down to 70 plus days. It's kind of like, a snap election in Europe. You just got to get out there and get your story out as quickly as you can.
Everybody's different in a debate, but have we ever had a prosecutor in a debate? I don't think so.
I don't know.
I mean, it's a whole different pulse.
We know how Mr. Trump likes to debate. I'm just not sure, to what extent or how Kamala Harris would do there.
I spent all weekend on the Costco zeitgeist, getting ready for Lisa Mateo to give us a Costco update. John Tucker, did you go to Costco this weekend?
Should I admit that I used someone else's
Costco
membership card?
You went in incognito.
Incognito. I have to wear a disguise. The
good.
people who look at those, they don't care. That's my assessment.
They threw me out of Costco a million years ago. I can't remember why, but true story. Red and green on the screen right now. Futures up 7, the VIX 16.12. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, and John. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are set to return to the campaign trail this week. Harris and her running mate, Governor Tim Walz, are kicking off a bus tour in Georgia, hoping to build on their momentum following the Democratic National Convention. Former President Trump plans to head to Michigan. It's going to be his 3rd time in the battleground state in just the last 9 days. Meanwhile, Trump's vice presidential running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, said that if elected, Mr. Trump would veto any national abortion ban.
Donald Trump wants to end this culture war over this particular topic. If California wants to have a different abortion policy from Ohio, then Ohio has to respect California and California has to respect Ohio.
Vance spoke on NBC's Meet the Press, heard Sundays on Bloomberg. Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders says people are growing tired and fatigued with Trump's consistent and outrageous lies.
The vice president now has a very good chance to win it. She's certainly going to win the popular vote by millions of votes, and I think she has a great chance to win many of the battleground states.
Senator Sanders spoke on ABC's This Week, heard Sundays on Bloomberg. Russia has unleashed a massive drone and missile barrage through Ukraine that appeared to target energy infrastructure. At least 3 people were killed. The barrage began around midnight and continued beyond daybreak in what appeared to be Russia's biggest attack against Ukraine in weeks. The Seattle-Tacoma International Airport continues to see system outages after a suspected cyber attack. Lance Little runs the airport. He says they are working to mitigate the impact of the attack, but concedes some operations are still not working.
We know we need people ready to help passengers locate current gate, flight time, and bag claim information. We have many volunteers on site wearing bright green colors.
However, the TSA is not affected. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom Pauljohn.
80 years from now, are they going to auction off Aaron Judge's jersey for $24 million?
It won't take 80 years to get $24 million. But, boy, you know, the Babe Ruth, that's I know where you're going here. It's like, I got to set this up. It was the 1932 World Series, Game 3, and that was the famous one where he points and he says, it's going there. And lo and behold, it went there.
It's a statement on our youth. I mean, Michael Jordan was $10 million for some jersey, which was a big event. Mm-hmm. And this one was $24 million.
$24.12 million.
A lot of money out there in the marketplace.
Yeah.
A lot of money out there in the marketplace, for anything.
It's just remarkable.
But what's remarkable is what we're seeing from Judge this year. I mean, Michael Kay, the voice of the Yankees on Yes Network.
On that.
Michael Kay had made a very interesting comment. He's the voice of the Yankees broadcaster on Yes Network. He just said, you have to step back and really watch and take into perspective what's happening here, because you really rarely see a performance like a player you're seeing now with Judge. I remember when my kids were younger, I used to wake them up to come down and watch Mariano pitch and close out a game. Now I'm texting him saying, hey, Judge is coming up in 5 minutes. Get to it. Make sure you're watching here because this is history.
Asking is someone who detests the dreaded Yankees, is he a good outfielder? Does he does he contribute?
Great outfielder.
I just offended someone in the control room.
Huge arm. Guy can run like the wind.
He's got an arm. He's got a Dwight Evans
and
arm.
he can run like the wind, and just amazing. He's got it all.
Very cool.
Yeah. I wonder if we're going to have another Roger Maris year where he breaks that record.
They say he's modeling 63.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yep.
He's modeling 60. But then they're going to walk him, which I think
they haven't been.
I'm surprised. A single.
Yeah, but I'm surprised that they're pitching to him as much as they are pitching to him. And the reason they have to pitch to him is you got this guy called Juan Soto, who is extraordinarily a great hitter, and you got Giancarlo Stanton too, which you can't go around. So I mean, it's a great part of the
Michael,
lineup.
I'm thrilled that you bought the Babe Ruth jersey.
Well,
congratulations.
Thanks for you guys putting in the dollars. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that was all because of Bitcoin. Babe Ruth jersey. Thank you, Emma Bowman over at NPR for that brief. Futures up this morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Futures for now, they have turned mixed after last week's Fed-fueled rally. The Dow futures up 24. S&P 500 futures just a point higher. The NASDAQ futures have turned lower. They're down 40 points. Nvidia stock gaining 3,776% since the start of 2019. Well, they report earnings Wednesday. Right now, most active stock this morning up 0.4%. Tensions do remain high. The risk of a region-wide Mideast war still present, so that's pushing crude oil prices higher. As you look at Brent, the international benchmark, that is up 2.9% so far this morning. For what it's worth, according to Bank of America data, the equal-weighted S&P 500 nearly the cheapest it's been relative to its mainstream cap-weighted counterpart since during the tech bubble of the late 1990s. And a digital asset from the blockchain project linked to Telegram Messenger has lost about $2.7 billion in market value. This reflects the uncertainty sparked by the detention of the messaging app's co-founder. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paula and Tom.
John, help me out here, because I think with your heritage, I mean, we're talking real radio with John Tucker folks, and it's real simple. There's a revolution going on, and Paul and I are thrilled to be part of it. With YouTube, you go out to Bloomberg Podcasts, you subscribe to us. We're humbled by the growth, particularly the international growth, but we are committed to radio. Bloomberg 1130 in Boston, in New York, I should say, Bloomberg 1130. And starting September 3rd, joining us on an FM signal, 92.9 FM in Boston. And of course, all of that with what we're doing in Washington, 99.1 FM in Washington as well. Paul, it's a big fat signal in Boston, Washington, and New York.
It's a big boy signal.
Big boy signal.
And based on the success that we've enjoyed in the nation's capital, we're going to replay that success in Boston.
And it bounces off of people like you, John, really mourning the passing of WCBS. I mean, it is a sea change for New Yorkers.
Well, the sports station, the Disney-owned sports station, wanted a better signal, and this was the one that was available, and they're all owned by Odyssey, and they're going through some big changes.
And they're having some challenges as well.
Yep. So it was back in, 1967, that, or thereabouts, late 60s, that WCBS, All News Radio, made its debut. And as of today, reflexively, I just went to go to the station, because Lisa's shift, you do a couple of business reports for WCBS, and like, dead air. And I'm like, oh my God.
Interesting. 92.9 FM Boston. We'll be there September 3rd. And of course, every day with Nathan Hager and company. 99.1 FM in Washington, D.C. Futures up 3. Where are we going right now, Paul?
Let's go to newspapers.
We got to go to newspapers.
I think we might
Let's do that.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Your daily look at the front pages, the John Tucker Hour, brought to you by Interactive Brokers Bond Marketplace. Access their vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities, no markups, no built-in spreads, low transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds. Mr. Tucker.
All right, let's take a deeper dive. Bloomberg Quick Take has a deeper dive into this story that we've been reporting all morning long. As we learned of the arrest of the CEO in Europe, comes the question of how did the messaging app Telegram become a focus of extremist activity online? The service was started back in 2013, and it is actually one of the most downloaded apps worldwide. It also polices content with what you could call a pretty light touch. It's used by hundreds of millions of people across the world as a straightforward, everyday communication tool. Users can also post stories, create discussion groups, or establish what are known as channels, and a channel can end up drawing millions of subscribers. Now, Telegram was used to foment and coordinate those anti-immigrant riots in the UK last month. Well, earlier this month, I should say. Law enforcement agencies, they do actually have more leverage to persuade Facebook and Meta to help them identify users engaged in illegal activities, as it's a publicly listed company and it's headquartered in the U.S. This has proven to be largely powerless when it comes to Telegram, which is based in Dubai.
It was fermenting overnight with a huge Russian response, and the French seem pretty entrenched on it. It's just this is the way it is. What else do you have next?
All right, this is from the New York Times. Apple rethinking its movie strategy. When Apple won a bidding war in 2021 for the rights to make the action comedy Wolves with George Clooney and Brad Pitt, it did so in part because it promised the stars they'd put the movie into a large number of theaters. But this month, just 6 weeks before the film was set to show up in thousands of theaters across the country, Apple announced a significant change in plans. Wolves will now be shown on a limited number of movie screens for 1 week before becoming available on the company's streaming service.
Let's stop here. This is really important, Paul. I looked at a pie chart this weekend of market share. Who's kidding who?
Yep.
These people, this is a fantasy. Variety Magazine's done a great job on this. This is a fantasy of micro share. The fact is Paramount, Apple, all the rest have micro share. It's delusional.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, and in this particular story, Tom, I mean, you get two heavyweights, George Clooney and Brad Pitt. You make a deal with these people. I can't imagine what that meeting was like to say, guys, we're going back.
They are not too happy. And they should follow my advice, Brad. Read the fine print.
Exactly. I mean, it was, Apple can do obviously whatever Apple wants, but boy, if you're George Clooney and Brad Pitt, I mean, you have to be.
Right.
You want that. You came up in the world where you had the broad theatrical release. So
in honor of the courage of what they did in World War II, we watched the World War II flyers thing on Apple. Spielberg did it with Tom Hanks. It was great, but it's dad garbage. It's like it got next to nobody watched it. I mean, I've never seen an industry where nobody cares if anybody's watching.
I mean, there's Matt Damon and there's another movie out on one of these streaming services that back in the day it would have been out in the theaters. Huge promotion, huge budget, hundreds of millions of dollars spent on every talk show. It comes out with just a whimper. But I guess if I'm Matt Damon, they wrote me my $10 million check. I spent 3 months on this thing.
I don't know.
I guess that's the new world.
It's the new reality.
Yes, it is.
You have to adjust.
Do you have one more, sir?
Well, let's take this one. I love this one. From the Financial Times. IKEA is taking on eBay. IKEA is starting a peer-to-peer marketplace for consumers to sell secondhand furniture to each other. This is IKEA pre-owned. Will be tested in Madrid and Oslo until the end of the year with the aim of rolling out the buying and selling platform globally. The new marketplace, part of a transformation of IKEA over the past few years.
So this is the couch with pizza and...
The couch with Swedish meatball stains.
Yeah.
You can get some other fool to buy it from you. So.
All right. I mean, but who's ever put together an IKEA piece of furniture? I have not done that, but I know that's a
I have so many Allen wrenches left over from that. It's like a whole collection.
I do have a collection of Allen wrenches. I full disclosure, folks, I've never been in an IKEA.
No, sir. No surprise there.
Don't know what you're missing.
John Tucker, thank you for the news there. Sorry, Paul, what are you looking at on the Bloomberg Launchpad? What catches your attention today?
Yeah, I'm looking at a little bit of a mixed on the equity markets. Not a lot of movement there, but I am looking at WTI crude oil. I'm looking at Brent crude oil. Tom, Brent is up 2.8%, just above $81 per barrel. Yeah. So, what's going on in Ethiopia? Another $15, and thankfully we're going to be chatting with Dennis Gartman today, so that's perfect time.
Yeah, along with the yen there, that's triangulated with a 144.14 yen. That's a stronger Japanese yen over the last number of weeks against the weak dollar as well. Idiosyncratic, I'm going to go there, I haven't mentioned it in ages. Turkish lira.
Oh boy, here we go.
A couple days ago went through 33 and gave us a 34 on Turkish lira. There's some people very optimistic about Turkey having the courage to get together their monetary theory and their fiscal theory as well. We don't make the call on the bets. We're just pointing out some people at some point look for a stronger Turkish lira.
Get Damon Sassower in here. We'll break it down.
It's good. I mean, it's like the last week of August, and we're in the summer, the summertime here, and I mean, you're out of John Tucker's house or Paul Sweeney's. Sure. You're in New Jersey and you got your can of Budweiser. Mm-hmm. You know, what do you do?
I wanna jam it with you. We're jamming, and I hope you like jamming too.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news. Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond. The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, John Tucker. Get to it in this half hour. Lindsey Piegza coming up at 8:15 on the Powell speech, The View Forward. Our equity interview of the day, Gina Martin-Adams here in moments as well. Futures up 6. Right to it, the Interactive Broker Studios. Our Bloomberg Business Flash, John Tucker.
All right, post-Fed Monday, everybody penciling in a September cut. Futures turning mixed. Gold continues its march above 2,500. Crude oil pushing over 2% higher. S&P 500 about 0.5% below its record close. Nvidia most active pre-market. It's up less than 1%. Gets ready to report earnings midweek this morning. Durable goods, that's at 8:30 Wall Street time. Thursday, initial jobless claims. And Friday, the Fed's preferred inflation measure. Dow futures up 45, S&P E-mini futures up 7, the NASDAQ futures down 13. We check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Good morning, all of you out on YouTube. Go to YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. One reason is conversation with Gina Martin-Adams. She drives equity at Bloomberg Intelligence. She's had the courage to be in the market through thick and thin. Gina, what do you say to people that just flat out have missed this great bull market? How do they mentally get into a market they missed? The boat's left the dock.
Yeah, that's okay. It's never too late to start investing in equities. I mean, I think that the trouble is that people love to try to time the market, and they focus on one thing and one thing alone, and that is a valuation multiple for the index at large, and that scares them off.
Mhm.
But in reality, there are a lot of things that move markets, and most importantly, earnings momentum is an incredible driver of stocks regardless of where valuations are. And we happen to be in a point in time where earnings momentum is improving materially.
All right. Sorry, Gina,
ahead.
but so
Yeah.
I know you've been talking to us about earnings. We really need to focus on earnings. Put into context the 2Q earnings that we just completed, and more importantly, maybe the guidance that we got from these companies.
Yeah, it was really, frankly, quite a phenomenal earnings season in so many ways. The S&P 500 beat expectations at about 13.7%. The expectation at the start of the season, according to analysts, was 8.3. Importantly, ex-Mag 7 companies posted almost double-digit growth. The expectation was for 5, so very strong breadth of improvement. And guidance was very positive. Our guidance momentum score poked into positive territory for the first time since 2021. So companies that are guiding, granted there are usually only about 20% of companies in the S&P 500 guide in any given quarter.
Really? 1 out of 5?
Yeah, it's
I
1
did
in
not know that.
5.
I did
Mostly
not know
tech and discretionary are the sectors that guide. It is somewhat concentrated, but nonetheless, it's a pretty good indicator of what to expect, and guidance has been quite positive.
All right, so last Friday, while Tom and Lisa and Michael McKee were at the $1 Million Cowboy Bar, Fed Chairman Jay Powell was making some pretty, compelling comments about where he thought interest rates were going. We had the markets really move on that news on Friday. What did you take away from those comments?
Yeah, I think a lot of people mistakenly say, well, why would stocks rally on an idea that the economy is weakening just because rates are going higher or going lower? And the reality is, if the economy is weakening but earnings are improving, earnings drive stock prices. The economy does not. And earnings are telling you that the outlook is getting brighter for most S&P 500 companies at this point in time. Combined with that, you've got a Fed that's going to ease off on the brake at the very least in September, maybe even a few more times in coming months. That creates an environment in which valuations are supported while earnings are recovering, and which is quite frankly the Goldilocks position for stocks. I think that we get really captivated. We've talked about this ad nauseum on this in this sort of format, but we get so captivated by the macro numbers, and we forget that earnings do not always follow macro, tick by tick. And if your macro is predominantly about cost cutting via marginal increases in the unemployment rate, that can be a condition that's very supportive for stocks because it means margin sustainability. And we did hear throughout second quarter earnings season, especially from some of the tech companies really involved in the AI race, that they are laying off workers again. But are these workers going to find new jobs over time? Most of the answers to that question are yes. We've seen that over the last several years.
The reality, folks, is Gina works. If you go down to Home Depot below us and you go down aisle 6 tools, there's a little orange door. You go through that secret door, and there's 200 people slaving away. What do your equity animals, Dan out on YouTube live chat wants to know what your equity animals say about which sector benefits from presumed dollar weakness?
So it's a combination right now. I think you want to look at the combination of dollar weakness and yield curve upward steepening. The yield curve is steepening pretty significantly in an environment where rates are coming down. That is the primary beneficiary of that. The beneficiary of that is actually financials. And the yield curve historically has a stronger meaning for stocks than does the dollar. The dollar, on the other hand, could benefit all of the multinationals in the index.
Exactly.
Some of them are tech, some of them are industrial, some of them are energy. It's very difficult to paint a sector brush on the dollar.
But can you review, I don't want to do this because you don't have your usual 4 inches of notes with you, but can you review the foreignness of our American multinationals? We don't understand that.
I think it's a very good point, and something also that really helps us to sort of detach from U.S. economic signals alone as signals for the stock market is that roughly 33 to 35% of S&P 500 revenues come from outside the United States.
Wow.
Tech is the most internationally centric sector, but it's really across sectors at this point where you get exposure to outside of the United States in the S&P 500.
We're going to get Nvidia earnings after the close on Wednesday. It's amazing the impact Nvidia has on the entire market and psychology. How do you guys as strategists who don't look at individual stocks, how do you factor that into if Nvidia has a good day Wednesday, that means a lot for a lot of different stocks. And conversely, if they have a bad day, that's a problem.
I think, and we postulated over the course of the last couple of quarters, that Nvidia's impact is in the process of peaking.
Okay.
And the reason Nvidia had become so incredibly important is not only because it's large and AI-centric, but because the large AI-centric companies, Nvidia being one of them, were really the only companies producing strong earnings momentum over the course of the last 12 to 18 months. We've seen that migration toward more earnings momentum emerging for the rest of the index, which means while Nvidia is still important, it's still one of the biggest stocks in the index, still the poster child for AI. There are other opportunities that are starting to emerge. So I think, in the period of time in which Nvidia was the only game in town, it was incredibly difficult because you have to time sort of what they're going to say. But I think that impact is likely diminishing as other opportunities.
It's been a terrible market. 1 year return. Dow up 20%, SPX up 28%, NASDAQ Composite, not the NASDAQ 100, up 32%. Is that how outlier is that outlier performance?
That's pretty outlier performance. Your average annual return to stocks over the long term is closer to 8%. Over the last decade, it's about 11%. So it's extremely strong performance. Now, caveat that with, we were just coming off of a massive decline in stocks. Remember, 2022 was a horrible year, where 2022 we had greater than 20% drop in large cap stocks.
In triple leveraged.
So some of this is just averaging out over time, but it's been an extraordinary year for stocks without a doubt.
What's your research topic this week for the 4 people still working at Bloomberg Intelligence?
Yeah, it's a great
late
point.
August.
We're going to dig into valuations a little bit this week. Today we released a lot on earnings. We do transcript sentiment analysis, and we paired that with our review of earnings season. But we're going to dig in a little bit to valuations this week, and also the tech and consumer discretionary sectors.
Gina, thank you so much. I'd have you sit with us through the rest of the hour, but we got to talk to Michael Barr sitting down because the Tigers have won 3 in a row. So, Barr can't be on a pole. They're going for a 4th win against the powerhouse Chicago White Sox.
This is much more important.
Much more important. Gina Martin Evans, thank you so much. Brilliant equity coverage. If you are on the terminal, the Bloomberg Professional Service, I can't say enough about the equity coverage of Bloomberg Intelligence. Paul doesn't care. I care. It's jaw-dropping what they do company to company without giving you buy, hold, sell, which is frankly sometimes a relief as well. The VIX 16.05, the Sweeney yield stunning 3.91%. on the 2-year yield. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are set to return to the campaign trail this week. Harris and her running mate, Governor Tim Walz, are kicking off a bus tour in Georgia, hoping to build on their momentum following the Democratic National Convention. Former President Trump is heading to Michigan this week. Meanwhile, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are talking. Speaker Mike Johnson in Minneapolis, supporting the state's Republican candidates running for House seats, tried to tie Democratic presidential nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris, closer to the Biden administration's policies.
The American people have suffered through 3.5 horrible years of Kamala Harris's agenda, and we cannot afford 4 more of those.
Texas State Representative Ron Reynolds was one of the first ones to publicly call for President Biden to step away from the presidential race, and at the time he was attacked by his fellow Democratic colleagues. Reynolds says things sure look different now, especially with more young voters who are now supporting the Harris-Walz ticket.
I've talked to a lot of young voters that have been absent since Obama was on the ticket. They are going to come back. That is the difference maker right there.
Reynolds spoke to ABC Dallas affiliate WFAA. After a heavy military exchange yesterday, both Israel and Hezbollah are indicating that they are stepping back from the brink of all-out war. Hezbollah's leader says the attack was in response to Israel killing a top militant commander in Beirut last month. Boeing has suffered a new setback in its space ambitions. As Bloomberg's Ed Baxter reports, NASA has a snub for its astronauts' return mission.
NASA says the continued struggles are causing it to finally decide to not have the Starliner bring them back, but instead wait until February and come back by SpaceX. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson says safety.
The decision to keep Butch and Sonny aboard the International Space Station and bring the Boeing Starliner home uncrewed is a result of a commitment to safety. Our core value is safety.
This leaves Boeing's new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, with a question of how committed Boeing will remain, knowing the costs that might be ahead. It has not been a good year for Boeing. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Mike Labarre. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
So we got 2001, winning 20 games more. Matt Morris, Curt Schilling, Randy Johnson, who I adored, John Lieber, what a stalwart he was. And that was sort of like, not like the 90s or the 50s or the 70s, but I mean, you used to win 20 games to get paid. Skubal winning 15 games for the Detroit Tigers. A, Cy Young, B, miracle. I mean, how does he win 15 games if starting pitchers are pitching 4 innings now?
That's a very good question. And this is why we talked about this. I want to see the rule where they got to go at least 6 innings.
Yeah.
I want to see that. We can't, you can't have a starting pitcher and like he goes 2 innings.
How would the Yankees be different if they had pitchers that had to go 6 innings?
Well, I mean, they've got good starting pitching. Their bullpen's a little bit weak, but I mean, now you don't get paid on the wins and losses time. It used to be a 20-game winner would get you paid. Now it's all about the analytics. It's your WAR, wins above replacement.
Could Greg Maddux play today?
He could, but he's special. But I mean, the game's managed completely different, thanks to, I think, in part to analytics, which just kind of doesn't really take some of the old metrics that we all grew up with.
Skubal and the Tigers going for 4 straight wins tonight.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Futures right now indicate a mixed open on Wall Street. The S&P 500, the NASDAQ 100, both chalked up gains of more than 1% on Friday after the dovish tilt from Jerome Powell. And Nvidia delivering earnings after the close on Wednesday. Right now, that's the most active stock pre-market. It is up about 0.5% right now. 2 years after the merger was announced, Kroger and Albertsons finally getting their day in court. There's a federal court hearing in Portland on the FTC's bid to block that $24.6 billion deal. Right now, you have the Dow futures up 62, S&P E-mini futures up 9. Yeah, the NASDAQ futures 3 points higher. Brent crude, the international benchmark, up 2.5% right now, 81.02 a barrel. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul, Tom.
John Tucker, thank you so much. You know, I look at Albertson Kroger's and I get what the FTC's doing. They're dominant.
Yeah,
I mean, out west, they're like...
They are. But I thought, usually in these type of situations, just divest some stores and there you go. But maybe not.
Lindsey Piegza with us now, chief economist at Stifel as well. The world changed on Friday. It was something, Lindsey, to sit on the lawn at Jackson Hole and realize this was a speech. Was this the Powell speech of his career?
Well, it certainly did signal that Chair Powell is on the same page with the market, that, quote, the time has come to adjust policy. Although he did say that the direction of travel is still uncertain, and he left the door open in terms of the timing and the pace of rate cuts, suggesting that the Fed is still data dependent, but he wanted to make sure that investors and market participants were very clear that the Fed is on board. The time has come for rate cuts.
Lindsey, the last paragraph I thought was elegiac. I was looking for him to try to define Fed independence. Quote, "We will be open to criticism and new ideas while preserving the strengths of our framework. The limits of our knowledge, so clearly evident during the pandemic, demand humility, like we get from Lindsey Piegza at Stifel, and a questioning spirit focused on learning lessons from the past, etc., etc." It's my Yul Brenner imitation. Lindsey, what are the lessons from the past that Chairman Powell learned?
Well, I think this was a big mea culpa in the sense that, look, they were holding on to crisis level accommodation well beyond what was appropriate. They continued to wear the transitory T-shirt for much longer than was necessary. And they realized now that that was a policy mistake, that was an error coming into this cycle. And they allowed, in many ways, price pressures to become more ingrained than they otherwise would have had they taken their foot off of the gas sooner. And so I think that's a recognition of the Fed contributing to the inflationary problems that we continue to see today, and their willingness to say, we're going to do our best to try to not make a second policy error on the back end.
So, Lindsey, from your perspective, is the Fed now pivoting to easing from a position of strength, i.e. the economy's okay, or a position of weakness, which is maybe they're too late here?
Money question.
No, I think right now the economy is still in very solid conditions, and Chairman Powell all but said so within the details of that speech, suggesting that price stability has not yet been achieved. He's increasingly confident, but prices are still high. And at the same time, the labor market, while beginning to show signs of cooling, is still overall solid. So I think right now, when we look at the consumer, when we look at the momentum in the underlying economy picking up from Q1 to Q2, not to mention, again, against the backdrop of still elevated inflation, the Fed still has a good amount of leeway to continue to move at a very slow, tempered pace, keep us in a relatively firm period, a restrictive period of policy. Remember, even after the Fed cuts rates for the first time, the Fed is in no rush back to neutral, let alone below neutral. So even after they initiate that first round reduction, it's likely that the Fed disappoints the market's expectations for a quick reversal to neutral and then back to an accommodative stance.
That's kind of where I wanted to go.
The economy is still on. I'm sorry?
Yeah, that's kind of where I wanted to go, Lindsey, because it's been a while since we've all been in a rate cutting cycle. How should we expect this to go? Should it be 25 basis points every meeting, every other meeting, front load 50? How do you think they're going to proceed?
Well, I think 50 is off the table. And in fact, I never thought 50 was on the table. I think even during the July press conference, Chair Powell pushed pretty aggressively against the notion of 50 basis points, saying that's not even something we're considering at this point. So I do think 25 basis points in terms of each move is the baseline. The timing, however, I think is going to be, again, extended beyond the market's expectation. The market is looking for every meeting. I think the Fed goes at most once a quarter. Again, there's no rush for the Fed to remove policy firming at this point. The Fed is simply responding to an economy that's normalizing, not an economy that's weakening.
In full disclosure, folks, Jackson Hole's changed. It's now a bunch of academics, which is great. It's a wonderful group of people, but I liked it when people like Lindsey Piegza were there, Jan Hatzius and others. I like Diane Swank was there, Paul as well. Dr. Piegza, I heard the Stifel argument from Adam Posen and also a guy named Philip Lane with a modest job for Lagarde at the ECB, in that they said, okay, disinflation in order, but that was a Lindsey Piegza Bible, is the but coming down. How do we monitor inflation to discover that we're not disinflating like the soft landing crew hope?
Well, I think it's going to remain a data-dependent focus. Powell identified this inflationary issue as a global phenomenon. He talked about a rapid rise in the demand for goods, supply chain strained, tight labor markets, a sharp hike in commodity prices. What's interesting about that list is a number of those factors are outside of the Fed's purview. And so if we did see international tensions, geopolitical issues lead to a reversal in some of the improvement that we've seen, that could quickly undermine a good portion of this disinflation without the Fed having any control over that reversal. And so again, I think this is a very complicated pathway for inflation. Yes, we've seen a lot of improvement, but the Fed must remain vigilant in maintaining focus on that disinflationary trend because it's still very bumpy and uneven.
Lindsey, thank you so much. Lindsey Piegza at Stifel this morning here on the Powell speech, its ramifications for it. Paul, I thought you were brilliant there on the idea of, okay, now the step forward, the good and the bad of it for the markets. I think it's ambiguous, to say the least.
Yeah, because we'll get some smart people in here that'll say the Fed's already behind the curve, they've missed it, and we are either in a recession or teetering on the edge of one. But then at the same time, we'll get some well-versed folks like Lindsey Piegza. This is no, the Fed's in a good spot here. The economy's doing just fine. And so the Fed's in a good spot here. So again, we'll have to, this will be something we'll probably be able to answer in a year or 2 or 3's time.
Did you see the economic data 2 Fridays, since you're not here this Friday?
No, please.
2 Fridays from now, housing, we've got capital goods and durable goods.
Yep.
We've got S&P CoreLogic, GDP numbers the 29th, the 30th, a raft of information, core PCE, blah, blah, blah. Then we take off 8 days for Labor Day. Tucker's working. And then ISM and all that, the JOLT survey, McKee's favorite. We finally get to claims and jobs September 6th.
Yeah. There's a lot of data between we get to the Fed has to come out and make a move here. So
I mean, by the time you show up for a Friday, we'll have a clearer picture.
Maybe exactly right, exactly. So if you're the Fed, you can wait, as Lindsey Piegza said, and wait on the data.
This is not on Golden Pond. You don't shut down the beach house Labor Day weekend.
No, we're year-rounders.
September's mint.
No, we're year-rounders.
I mean, September and October.
The best. Yep. September's the best.
Mr. Hurricane, do you get the bees? The bees start coming out.
Nope. We're good. We're good.
The bees start. What are you talking about?
I don't know. I'm sitting on a deck at Jackson Hole. The bees start coming out, and there's some Fed president, I don't know, sitting near me, and like Secret Service came out and tried to get rid of the bees.
We have the giant bees right now, the cicada wasps. They're harmless, but they're very intimidating looking. They're like this big, and they attach themselves to cicadas and lay their eggs in them.
See, again. Where this stuff comes from, I have no idea.
Is this Wild Kingdom? Wild Kingdom.
Well, you brought up the bees.
Good morning,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Everybody in Omaha, Nebraska. Good morning, out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast out on YouTube. September 3rd in Boston, 92.9 FM. Good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. After last week's rally, stock futures, they have turned mixed this morning. Dow futures up 59. S&P E-mini futures up 8. The NASDAQ futures right now, they are down just about 10 points. S&P 500 knocking on the door of its record high, just about 0.5% away. And we are data dependent, so let's bring you the very latest data. Durable goods orders just out. That's an eye popper, up 9.9% for the month of July. The survey calling for 5%. When you strip out transportation, it was lower, down to 0.2%. Also some revisions as well. And as we look at oil right now, tensions in the Middle East. You have Libya's eastern government saying it'll shut down all oil production and exports. That adds up to higher crude oil prices. Crude right now, Brent, the international benchmark, up 2.7%, 81.13 a barrel. And of course, Nvidia, most active in the pre-market right now. They report after the close of regular trading on Wednesday. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Durable goods, nicely reported by John Tucker. A big headline number, but you take out ex-Boeing, and it's a little bit negative with revisions, which are what I'm going to call modestly or sharply and negative. Little lift to the market. Futures up 8. The VIX coming in 16.00 on the VIX are right now. Busy economic week ahead as well. Our honor to go to Israel. And Ethan Bronner, our Israel bureau chief, barely describes his knowledge, his effort, his reporting over decades in the greater Levant. Ethan, let me just get to US 101. What is the distinction between Hezbollah and Hamas?
Oh, well, good morning, Tom. I mean, there's an enormous distinction. Hezbollah is a Shiite Lebanese group on the northern border and the southern part of Lebanon. And it's the controlling force in Lebanon politically and militarily right now. And Hamas is a Sunni Palestinian group based essentially in Gaza, south of Israel.
Is Israel, from a military standpoint, do they approach this like a war, like military, like divisions and platoons? Or is it a different approach to the border with Hezbollah?
So I would say that it's been a difficult transition for the Israeli military. It faced states, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, and so forth in the past. And in facing these militias, I think it's finding it more difficult to know how to handle it. I mean, it has an enormous technological advantage, obviously, but it turns out a lot of the low-tech stuff that Hezbollah and Hamas have done using drones that you can buy at Best Buy and building tunnels have really caused quite a lot of problems for the country. So I think that it's a mix. I mean, the truth is that Hamas, Nukhba force, and the Hezbollah, also militia force, are set up in divisions and in brigades, but it's really a much more of an asymmetrical warfare problem for the country.
So, Ethan, how challenging is it for the Israeli Defense Forces to have what now appears to be a two-front active war here?
Oh, it's very challenging, Paul, and it's more than two fronts, right? You have Hezbollah in the north, you have Hamas to the south, you have the Houthis further to the south, and you have militias in Iraq and Syria. All of these things, of course, are funded and sponsored by Iran way to its east. And so it likes to think of it, or not so much likes to, but it tends to think of it as a seven-front war, because there's also concern about the West Bank and some Israeli Arabs who may not be thrilled about the place. So it's very, very complex situation for the country.
Was it surprising, Ethan, that the Israelis chose to bomb Lebanon, I guess, preemptively to thwart potential attack?
I mean, you know, these things are surprising to you and me because we're not sitting in those intelligence rooms. But what they said, that they had very precise intelligence, that, you know, we've known for several weeks that since the late July killing of a militia leader in Beirut, that Hezbollah was going to respond. And at the beginning of this last week, there was a clear sense that it was coming up this week, and there was a lot of chatter about it. And then it became clear that Israel had very precise intelligence that all of these launchers were headed toward mostly northern Israel, but they included a plan to hit Lilot, which is where the intelligence community sits just outside of Tel Aviv, and they decided that they couldn't allow that to happen.
Ethan, you're such a pro on this. When I look at Israeli media, all the different Israeli Post and all the rest of it, my head spins. I can't keep track of who represents who's on the team, etc. Does Mr. Netanyahu have the support of elites in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem? Does he have the support of the newspapers?
No, he does not. In many ways, Netanyahu, it's best to think of Netanyahu the way you might think of Donald Trump. Okay, that is to say, with a fair amount of popular support and utter rejection by the cultural, economic, and military elites of the country. But, you know, the people count for a lot. And he has also done pretty well in terms of his numbers and his polling in the last 4 or 5 months. He's back up. He's not totally up, but he is steady with whoever might compete against him. And it wouldn't shock me if he were to call an election in a few months and win.
That's right where I wanted to go. I mean, now he calls an election. And do you look at him, you know, within a democracy, a parliamentary structure, do you look at Mr. Netanyahu is basically with an extended term, an extended view, an extended vision?
Yes, I think it's very likely. I mean, look, I don't know if he'll win, but he has a decent shot at it. It's a similar question about Donald Trump right now, right? It's close, but he could. And he certainly has climbed back up because the further away we are from October 7th, the less people blame him and remember it as a failure of his part or his government, and the more his militant strength grows. And people really aren't, you know, especially after October 7th, Israelis don't have a sense of how to handle the situation except by being tough. I mean, there's plenty to say about that question, but that is the growing sentiment here.
Ethan, you're based in Tel Aviv. I'm fascinated to understand what it's like in Tel Aviv these days. I mean, if I were to walk the streets of Tel Aviv on a Saturday evening, what would I find in the restaurants, the cafes, just on the street?
You'd find it very hard to get a table, Paul, I can tell you that. It is very, very crowded. It is still a fairly wealthy place. Lots and lots of young people. I happen to live in the southern part in the kind of cool area. I'm not so cool, but they've let me in. And it is really, really crowded. So you could, as far as you know, you'd be in Barcelona, that kind of equivalent. There's no sense of menace on the streets of Tel Aviv right now.
Ethan, thank you. Ethan Bronner, day after day, there's
Always
leadership
good to talk.
in the Levant, Israeli bureau chief for Bloomberg News, acclaimed for his work over the last number of decades. I saw a tweet this weekend. And, you know, I mean, every seat was taken going out. Lisa had the Gulfstream.
She did, of course.
She had a tantrum.
Yep.
You know, coming back, I thought I had the 450, but I didn't.
Nope.
And, it's amazing. You're at the Jackson Hole Airport, and you're sitting there, and you're waving at Lisa going by in the Gulfstream, and she taxis out to go
You're
north
in 31B.
I'm in 31B. But everything was packed. The planes are packed. The airports are packed. I get home. There's some article I saw. The restaurants in New York City. Paul, you've led on this. I mean, the fact is the boom is tangible.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, there are at least two economies and two consumers out there. The folks that have owned assets, whether it's stocks or bonds or real estate, it generally, are doing quite well and arguably will do even better if interest rates start coming down. And then there's everyone else who I think the inflation shock that came about during the pandemic is still very, very real on a daily basis. No, you don't have to go any further than just the supermarket, and we all have to deal with that. But so to say that the rate of inflation is now back down towards a more normalized level, that doesn't mean a lot when you're paying $7 for a box of cereal that before the pandemic was $3 or $4.
Yeah, somebody said everything in food and basic inflation's up 20%.
Yep.
Before. Nvidia, the last 10 years, when Michael Barr bought it, Nvidia up 74% per year.
Can't keep track.
I mean, you know, it's truly.
I mean, these guys, they're earning their way into the multiple. I mean, it's 75 PE on a trailing, 45 PE on short, on a forward-looking. Their earnings are growing so fast, Tom, on looking forward, that they're earning their way into their multiple. That, you know, a lot of the bulls will say, listen, if you look at a couple years in advance and we have good visibility on those earnings, this stock's not overvalued. That's how fast they're growing their earnings. And so what that means is, boy, when they report their quarterly earnings, the bar is so high, the expectations are so high.
My fancy moving average is, you say, when did they go bullish? August of 2013.
Wow.
Is sort of when the bull market, in hindsight, was in place. On a log chart, folks, it's mighty linear. Michael Barr's, it's just great. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are set to return to the campaign trail this week. Harris is kicking off a bus tour in Georgia. Former President Trump plans to head to Michigan. Meanwhile, Republican and Democratic lawmakers are pushing their candidates. Republican Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas.
The American people are totally justified to conclude that Kamala Harris is a dangerous San Francisco liberal based on what she campaigned on the last time she ran for president and what this administration has done for the last 4 years.
Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont.
People are growing tired and fatigued with Trump's consistent and outrageous lies. And I think no matter what people may think of Kamala Harris, I think they want stability in the White House.
Both senators spoke on ABC's This Week, heard Sundays on Bloomberg. Low-level ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas are expected to continue in the coming days. Hamas walked away from discussions in Cairo over the weekend, saying Israel keeps changing the terms of the deal. Bloomberg's Jumani Bersecci is following the negotiations from our Middle East headquarters in Dubai.
One of the sticking points that comes up is the presence along the Philadelphia corridor, that is the border between Egypt and Gaza. Israel wants to continue to have a presence there. Egypt and Hamas say that that is a red line.
Bloomberg's Jumana Bersecci reporting from Dubai. Prosecutors say the suspect in Friday's attack in Germany was motivated by Islamic State group ideology. A 26-year-old Syrian man has been ordered held on suspicion of murder in the Solingen knife attack. It left 3 people dead and 8 wounded at a festival marking the city's 650th anniversary. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
Reporting this morning from the Bahamas, from Harbor Island in the Bahamas.
Oh.
A number of fun-filled days. When El Mateo, out on Twitter, she's got her, important reporting going on here, and it's just real simple. It's Lisa Mateo and fam.
Yep.
Harbor Island, the Bahamas.
Nice.
The kids are together. They're on speaking terms.
That's a good vacation.
It's amazing how that... Michael, when was the last time you and I were on speaking terms with our children, where we could do a photo like Lisa Mateo
Well,
on YouTube?
I don't even think they were a thought.
There's no thought. Nixon was president.
You know, Paul, I have vacation pictures too.
Oh, yeah?
You
we
don't
got to
wanna
put
see
them
them?
up on social.
We thank Lisa Mateo for team coverage from the Bahamas, Harbor Island, where she's ensconced for a number of air-conditioned days as well. Futures up 5 Dow, futures up 56. Paul, I'm looking at yields come in, and yields even off durable goods, they pretty much confirm the Powell speech.
Yeah, 10-year treasuries, Tom. We're sitting here right around 3.8% on your 10-year, 3.9% on your 2 years. You still have that inversion, but that inversion has been narrowing dramatically over the past several months. So, looking at there, you sit there at a 2-year treasury, 3.9%. That's not too shabby. It's not the 5% we had, back in the day a few months ago, but still not bad. We'll see how it plays out.
We're here all this week. Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash as we start this Monday post-Fed trading day. Dow futures indicates a higher open, up 52 points right now. S&P futures, they're up only 3, and the Nasdaq futures, they are down 36 points. Well, firms look like they're a little more guarded about investment. Orders for durable and capital goods, when you strip out transportation equipment like aircraft, that fell more than economists' expectations. And again, the major stock averages mixed after last week's rally. Fed Chair Jerome Powell did leave the door open to bigger rate cuts by remarking that any pace of rate cuts will depend on incoming data. Traders also anticipating Nvidia's earnings. That's Wednesday after the close. That may tell whether artificial intelligence exuberance is warranted. And Libya's eastern government halting oil production. That's helping push crude higher. Gold adding to its rally. It is above $2,500 an ounce. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Red and green on the screen, the VIX 16.06. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning brought to you by IBKR. With Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader, you can trade your views on key economic and climate indicators. Visit ibkr.com/forecast and get started today. There are different trades out there. I guess if you were smart enough to buy Nvidia or this, that, and the other thing, triple leveraged all cash fund. And then there's a trade of 2 decades. The persistency, the advance of gold when taken in yen is extraordinary. Going back over 20 years, it delivered something like 11% per year, up 1,100% off of the pandemic. I don't have the number in front of me, but it's to the moon, and sustains there even with recent strong yen. With the trade of the last 2 decades, Dennis Gartman joins us now on gold. Dennis, are you watching gold or are you watching Japanese yen?
I'm watching yen, I'm watching euros, and I'm watching gold, no question about it. Gold in yen terms, gold in euro terms, and even gold in dollar terms has been very strong. They've all been moving from the lower left to the upper right for a decade now, and I think that given the geopolitical circumstances that prevail, given the inflationary circumstances that prevail, gold is going to continue to go higher. I'm not a gold bug. I think there are times when one is supposed to be long of gold. There are times when one is supposed to be neutral of gold. And there are even times when one is supposed to be bearish of gold. But this is a time, and it has been the time, and it shall continue to be the time going forward to be long of gold in euro terms, yen terms, and in dollar terms. No question about it.
In North Carolina State, they have Gartman algebra where there's a weighting. Is your weighting to higher gold, or is your weighting to weaker foreign currencies and a resilient U.S. dollar? What's the preponderance?
My weighting is to higher gold. Period. End of discussion.
Is it debt deficit? I talked to Tom Honig about that at Jackson Hole. Is it just simply debt and deficit?
Well, the deficit clearly is supportive. The deficit here in the United States is clearly supportive of gold, no question about it, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. But as I like to say, gold has 2 things that drive it: inflation and geopolitical circumstances. And right now, I think geopolitical circumstances are the prevailing methodology of the prevailing fundamental taking gold higher.
Dennis, how do gold investors get a sense of value when gold is maybe relatively cheap versus relatively expensive? How do they do that?
You have to watch the charts more than anything else. Again, gold is driven by two circumstances: inflation and geopolitical circumstances. And again, geopolitics, I think, are so confusing and so disheartening at this point. That's going to drive gold prices from the lower left to the upper right. It has been, and it shall do, and shall continue to do the same. But gold, the problem with gold is that if you own gold itself, the bullion, you're not getting any yield from it. So you have to own gold stocks, and gold stocks, I think, have been undervalued relative to the price of bullion in and of itself. So erring upon the side of owning gold shares, miners, minor ETFs, that makes, to me, that's the most sensible way to own gold. So own GLD, own GDX, own Nugget. Those are the ways to own gold, in my opinion.
Dennis, what did you make of Fed Chairman Jay Powell last Friday at Jackson Hole?
I think they were late to the show, but early in the year, everybody was talking about the fact that the Fed would cut rates 5 and 6 times this year. I scoffed at that and said the most they would get was 1 or 2 cuts. I'll hold to that. Though I thought they'd wait until after the November meeting before they'd cut the rates, just to be apolitical as best they could. But it's clear that they're going to cut at the September meeting in 2 weeks, no question about that. And then the question shall be whether there'll be 1 or 2 more cuts after that. But I think there'll be 25 basis points in September, maybe 25 to 50 basis points in November. And the one thing I've learned in 50 years of being in the markets is that when the Fed begins the policy of easing monetary policy or begins the policy of tightening, it takes the overnight Fed funds rate much farther for a much longer period of time than anybody wants to imagine when the process begins. We're going to see overnight Fed funds rate down to 2 or 3% over the course of the next 2 years. It's just a matter of how long it takes to get there.
Dennis, in olden times, when you chiseled out the Gartman letter, which everybody in the street read, there's a famous photo of the collapse of Lehman, Paul Sweeney, and they're all listening to Mr. Fulder, whoever, explain to them it's over. And on one of the screens is the Gartman letter, big incentive. That's how you started your morning. And Dennis, if you were writing a letter today, back on page 5 or 6, after red wheat and gold and the Dow and all that, you would write about the politics of this nation. In full disclosure, folks, Gartman's been very honest about his politics. What are Republicans like you going to do? Are they going to vote for the Vice President of the United States?
No. We'll vote for Mr. Trump. We won't like it. He's not a Republican that we grew up with. He's not Ronald Reagan. He's not Jack Kemp. He's not a free market, no tariff type of Republican. But we'll vote for him instead of Miss Harris. No question about that. But it'll be a difficult lever to pull. But he's clearly the better candidate. Can he win? It's up for debate at this point.
Is he the same President Trump that stunned us in 2016 or through the campaign of 2020?
He was Mr. Tariff in 2020 and 2016. He's Mr. Tariff now, and I disagree with the policy of tariffs across the board. I think that's dangerous. It is historically deleterious to economic activity, and he's too big government as far as I'm concerned. He's not a Republican of the Ronald Reagan era, and I find that dismaying. But who is right now? We don't have anybody to hold the Ronald Reagan flag and wave it. We don't have anybody to hold the Jack Kemp flag and wave it. And I wonder who's going to take that flag up in the future. That's up for debate.
30 minutes, 30 seconds. I assume it was 30 minutes. Dennis Gartman, 30 seconds. So you can frame out 3,000 gold?
Yes, I think gold goes to $3,000 an ounce without. It'll take 2 or 3 more years to get there. It has been moving in that direction for the past several years, and I see every reason to think that it shall continue. So yes, 3,000 gold, but let's get to 2,750 first. Let's get to 2,800. Let's get to 2,900. Let's get to 3,000 over time.
Dennis Gartman, thank you so much. The Gartman letter, of course, affiliated with his work at the University of Akron as well. The back end of his note years ago, Paul, was great because unlike so many other people hiding their politics, he didn't hide his politics. He just said, this is the way it is. Right. And you know, that's an update there for those that mourn for the Gartman letter, the way you started your morning years ago. Certain other letters, too. Like at Yardeni.
Yeah, sure.
Who reaffirmed, Yardeni this weekend, after Powell, flat out reaffirmed the trajectory of his roaring 20s.
Right, exactly.
I mean, no other way to put it.
No.
I mean, he did as well. I don't know. When do we get Nvidia? Wednesday?
Wednesday after the close. How about that?
It's like that. I mean,
I don't know why they wait so long. I mean, I guess they can because they're Nvidia, but boy, all the tech companies reported almost a month ago.
The last 90 days ago, full disclosure, folks, I had to go to the website to really see what they do.
Right.
I mean, I'm the
design
dummy
chips.
here.
Yeah, I know. But it has become, for better or worse, the AI trade. Now, I think that's broadened out a little bit now. People are now thinking about some of the software applications and some of the other hardware applications. But for the longest time, and maybe even up to right now, it was the AI stock to own.
You know, I mean, we had Bob Marley on earlier. Mm-hmm. We'll do some more of that. Where did it end up? I remember sitting on a bed looking at this album going, who are these people? Roxanne.
is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Lisa Mateo on assignment. She reported from Harbor Island, Bahamas. Good morning, Lisa Mateo and fam. Down there, John Tucker in for Lisa Mateo. 4 lonely men driving forward the week. Sweeney off on Friday, as predicted, widely understood. I think I'll be here alone as well. We welcome all of you. Really interesting. I mean, it's a Monday that I knew would be interesting, but way more interesting after the Powell speech. I mean, Paul, what was it like being here, hearing it? Because we were flabbergasted at Jackson Hole by the conciseness, the organization, the intensity of the speech.
I think most people in the market actually reflects it, Tom, that I think we were surprised at how clear his message was.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't you had to read between the lines too much. All you did was just listen and read, and you got a sense of, okay, here we're going, here we go. And now then the conversation switched immediately to then what? You know.
Yeah, coming off the August, well, Paul was here. It was my one day off this summer. I took off when we went down a gazillion points, VIX to 65. But, you know, to get to where we closed on Friday, it's a 10.1% move off the bottom of August. Whatever. In what's important to me, Paul, 2 standard deviations of the recent max volatility. SPX 57.17. We're not there yet. But it shows you the bull marketness of this.
Yep, you got your VIX here sitting just below 16, Tom. So what a move from just 3 weeks ago.
Let's go over our plans here. This great digital experiment here. We'll do this before we get to John Tucker in the news. We're out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts, building every day. My initial goal there is get to 100,000 warm bodies subscribing. We're on our way to that. We'll see when we get there. Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, Bloomberg 1130 in New York. Good morning in Washington, on our signal in Washington. And on September 3rd, Paul, we got to give you a Boston accent here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's just simple. In Boston, new home starting September 3rd, 92.9 FM. 92.9 FM in Boston. Really looking forward to that.
It's the day after Labor Day, 92.9. It's a big signal, I'm told, by the radio people up in Boston, i.e. John Tucker. He's the expert here. So good news for all of our friends up in New England.
Well, we will see. Right now, from the Interactive Brokers Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, John Tucker's no Lisa Mateo.
Well, she'll be back, don't worry. After the more than 1% rally for the major stock averages on Friday, the futures this morning mixed this post-Jackson Hole Monday. Jerome Powell's pretty much penciled in a September rate cut. Nvidia, the most active pre-market right now, that is up just about 0.1%. In addition to Nvidia, earnings reports expected later this week from Salesforce, CrowdStrike Holdings, Dell, and Marvell Technologies. And as we wrap up earnings season, so far 80% of the companies in the S&P 500 that have opened their books, they've delivered positive earnings surprises. Orders placed with U.S. factories for business equipment declining in the month of July. The prior month's gain was revised lower, so this all suggests firms a little more guarded about investment. Dow futures right now up 66. S&P E-mini futures up 6. The NASDAQ futures right now down 28 points. Gold, 57.50 an ounce. Brent crude up 2.8%, 81.23 a barrel. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. A certitude of disinflation, and really, Paul, pushing against that. An annual visit with Adam Posen of the Peterson Institute, and he was heated in his Financial Times essay 2 days before Jackson Hole that he can't be certain of a disinflation tendency, made more important by what we heard from Philip Lane. Lots of good reporting there by our team in Jackson Hole. The Irish Independence has it. You know, Philip Lane of Ireland, economic advisor to Christine Lagarde, Philip Lane warns inflation not beaten yet. That's out there.
Yep.
That's out there in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, but I think, again, we're just going back to Friday from Jackson Hole, Tom. It seems like the U.S. Fed feels like they've got inflation kind of in check to the point where maybe they can begin reducing rates.
David Rosenberg writes this morning, he calls it super dovish.
Okay.
That's his phrase.
Okay, we'll go with that.
It is super dovish as well. We're waiting to line up with Jim Bianco. We'll get to him here in a moment. Let me do a data check. Futures lift up 7, a little bit sprightlier than maybe where we were. Maybe off durable goods. Yields come in critically. Or 2-year yield 3.89%, 10-year 3.78. You get a 30-year bond under 4%. That's a big deal. 4.08% there. And I can't say enough about how the 10-year real yield is really on a bounded support at 1.65%. Any break below that is a huge deal. Ian Lingen writing this morning at PIMO Capital Markets. He's been dead correct on this. Just wonderful. And he says with Powell, you got to extend out duration as well. No question about that. Paul, Brent, $2.22.
Look at that, Tom. I get Brent up. It just really over 3% here, 3.1% higher, 2.8% higher on Brent, $81, and WTI crude oil also up big.
Jim Bianco joins us. He has been cautious on the disinflationary trend like no one. He nailed, we're going to come down from 9% to X%. And the last mile of disinflation will be challenging. Jim Bianco, do you agree with Adam Posen, the Peterson Institute, Dr. Lane of Trinity, and the ECB that the inflation battle is not won?
Oh, I completely agree with that. The inflation battle is not won. And I think that what we're missing is the bigger point. Every time you have a recession or a financial crisis, the economy changes. This economy changed in big ways in 2020. We have remote work. We have a big surge of migrants, which is increasing the population of this country like we haven't seen in decades. And all of this is filtering into the economic data. Now, the mistake we're making is we're assuming, this is 2019. Let's just interpret the data like we did in 2019. And we're coming up with answers of the economy slowing, we might be in recession, inflation is licked, but I don't think that's the case at all. I think what we're seeing is an epic change in the economy. Change is not worse. And that it's actually doing a lot better than people think. And if that's the case, then stimulating an economy that's okay only produces more inflation. It does not necessarily produce higher growth. And that's the risk that we have going forward.
So, I mean, the tone from Fed Chairman Jay Powell, not even the tone, the actual content of his remarks seemed to really strongly signal that they feel pretty comfortable with the inflation environment. They feel pretty comfortable, they being the Fed, with the labor market, such that they can begin cutting rates in September. Do you think they're kind of maybe out ahead of their skis a little bit?
I do, but I'm not a member of the Fed and I don't get a vote. Chairman Powell, I'll just point out, he's the one that invented the supercore inflation measure. And the supercore inflation measure is meant to basically measure wage inflation. That measure, the CPI version of it, has moved up almost 1 full percent in the last year, and it's well over 4%, which is what had me scratching my head when he said, in wage inflation does not look like it's going to contribute to overall inflation. Well, Mr. Powell, your own measure is saying, yes, it is, and it has been, and probably will continue to be. So I'm not sure what he's looking at when he says that the inflation thing is done and we could now talk about cutting rates.
To dovetail, to use phrasing from Peter Orszag, the Bianco glide path with maybe PhD Eccles building glide path, does it simply center Jim Bianco as we're heading for a new R-starred, a new measurement of neutrality at a much higher than 2.0%?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And that is the biggest issue I think that Chairman Powell left open on Friday with his speech. All right, we're going to cut rates. We get it. You're going to cut rates in September. Where are we going? What is the neutral rate? How far do we have to go? No, that question has not been approached. And Wall Street somehow thinks that there's going to be 10 rate cuts in the next year or so. That's going to bring down the funds rate to around 2.5%. Well, most of the measures, most of the market-based measures, most Wall Street measures say that's way too much. It will be way too easy if we cut that much. So we really need to address this question.
Jim, we got to cut you off here, but you were delayed to the meeting. Were you delayed with us because you were getting your box seats for Detroit, Chicago White Sox tonight?
Yes, waiting for that 101st loss by the epic Chicago White Sox.
It would have been something. We'll get you on again soon. Much longer conversation and deserved conversation with Jim Bianco. Absolutely nailed the idea that disinflation would go only so far. Futures advance off Bianco. Futures up 9. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, John, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are set to return to the campaign trail this week. Harris and her running mate, Governor Tim Walz, are kicking off a bus tour in Georgia, hoping to build on their momentum following the Democratic National Convention. Former President Trump plans to head to Michigan. It's going to be his third time in the battleground state in just the past 9 days. Meanwhile, Trump's vice presidential running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, said that if elected, Mr. Trump would veto any national abortion ban.
Donald Trump wants to end this culture war over this particular topic. If California wants to have a different abortion policy from Ohio, then Ohio has to respect California and California has to respect Ohio.
Vance spoke on NBC's Meet the Press, heard Sundays on Bloomberg. Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders says people are growing tired and fatigued with Trump's consistent and outrageous lies.
The vice president now has a very good chance to win it. She's certainly going to win the popular vote by millions of votes, and I think she has a great chance to win many of the battleground states.
Senator Sanders spoke on ABC's This Week, heard Sundays on Bloomberg. The Middle East is on edge once again after what Israel is calling a preemptive strike on Hezbollah, taking out thousands of missile launchers in southern Lebanon. The U.S. is monitoring the situation. We get more with Bloomberg News Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Bronner in Tel Aviv.
10, 11 months of this has led to a kind of weird routine quality, which is that anytime there's a flare-up, there's a sense that it is going to spin out of control, and indeed it might, and so far it hasn't. There is a growing sense that maybe there's a kind of a choreographed containment underway that still could explode, but for the moment, both Hezbollah and Israel and Iran apparently have decided to keep it within a certain set of rules of engagement.
Bloomberg News Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Bronner. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
Thanks so much. I learn something every day, Paul, working with you on media. I'm trying to keep up with Sweeney on media. Everybody on a movie lot has a water tower. Yeah. There's the Warner Brothers water tower. There's the Paramount water tower. And obviously it was because of fire. Yeah. And also because they had to make film, and I guess they need a lot of, in the old days, they had to make. Are films on film anymore?
I don't know.
They're not. They're like digital.
I don't know. I can't imagine.
Who's winning in the Paramount battle?
I don't know.
Besides, we're all losing.
Edgar Bronfman, he was the bid that came in right before the go shop period expired, and it appears that Paramount is absolutely going to engage with him. So now we're kind of opened it up a little bit. Skydance was the presumed winner, but now Edgar Bronfman has got a credible group, and I believe Paramount is going to take a look at what he has to say.
Is this like the kind of deal where they're working all weekend?
I think they are. Absolutely. The bankers and the lawyers are, that's for certain. So, but they got to get something done soon here, because every day that ticks by that this thing is standing in limbo is not a good day.
Market lifts on a Monday. We're up 7. Now futures up 10. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Futures are mixed at the start of the week, featuring another full slate of corporate earnings. Also get the government's latest reading on inflation, the Fed's preferred reading on inflation that comes out Friday. Biggest earnings report this week, that'll be Wednesday after the close. From tech darling Nvidia, those shares up 161% so far this year. Federal Reserve officials, most notably Chair Jerome Powell, strongly hinting it is time for the central bank to start cutting its benchmark lending rate. Oil prices rising after Libya's eastern government halted production. And then the data we saw this morning showed orders for durable goods and capital goods, not counting transport equipment like aircraft, fell more than economists' expectations. S&P 500 futures 8 points higher. Dow futures right now up 59 points. The NASDAQ futures down 23 points. As we look at yields, the 2-year almost 3 basis points lower, 388. The 10-year down 2 basis points. That's at 377. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. There are things back before digital that you would carry around to be cool. Very important. You'd carry around what was called the Maroon Book from DLJ, Donaldson Lufkin. Jen read it. It was her beautiful fixed income essay. They had some young Turk named John writing. They would write for it, I think. Or Bear Stearns had some things.
Sure.
But the mother of all status symbols was to carry around the black books of Sanford Bernstein. There were any number of iconic names there. Good morning, Brad Hintz. But one of them was a guy named Pierre Ferragu. Not that familiar, I think, to Americans, but Pierre Ferragu was an absolute required read on global technology. We're thrilled he could join us right now on Nvidia, but on tech in general. Is Nvidia, Pierre, alone, or can we take signals from Nvidia across your larger technology space?
Hey, Tom, that's a great question. Well, Nvidia is definitely not alone. A lot of people supply Nvidia, and even more people depend on Nvidia for what they're doing. But Nvidia has this particularity of being almost last to speak in earnings season. So we know a lot of what's going on in the upstream of Nvidia, in the downstream of Nvidia before they report. So you don't have that much read across coming from them, and it's just because they speak last. So what we've heard so far is that the clients of Nvidia are increasing their capex very significantly. It's good for Nvidia. And then the supply chain of Nvidia is accelerating the pace at which they make more capacity available for Nvidia, which means that we are still, based on all what we see, in a world in which there are people want to buy more GPUs than the number of GPUs that can be actually manufactured.
Pierre, do we know yet, when we look across the tech stack and we see the capital spending numbers, which are just extraordinary, how much of that is incremental for AI versus maybe shifting it from other parts of the CapEx budget, whether it's IT or something else?
Yeah, it's a great question, Paul. It's usually one of the most trickiest questions you can ask when you have a technology transition. But here, the answer is actually relatively easy. Spending on AI chips might, reach like 150 billion in 2025 next year. And compared to that, the market for CPUs, which is really like the leading chip of what I would call like the traditional infrastructure, the legacy infrastructure, is only in the 20s. It's less than 30 billion. So the market for AI infrastructure is so large that you can't talk about a shift or anything else.
Right.
So that's one first way to look at it. And the second way to look at it is we haven't seen more than a slightly sluggish market outside of AI. And when you ask Microsoft, Google, and others, why are you not spending so much on CPUs and others and traditional servers? they never tell you it's because we're done with these technologies. They're telling you it's just that we don't have time. We're so focused on getting out AI that we don't have time. We'll have to catch up at some point.
Pierre, any conversation with you, we've got to look at your brilliant call on Apple with a neutral. There are 41 buys, 17 neutrals holds on Apple right now. What would it take for Apple to do to get Pierre Ferragu to go long Apple, to go buy Apple?
Well, you would need to create, in some ways, way more controversy than what you have on the stock today. Apple is a very easy story. It's a very, very high quality franchise, probably the highest quality consumer franchise in the world. They're still on top of their game. And they're very good at defending their position, mostly as, a provider of the actual hardware, like the handset, and also building out from their 1 billion user base, a steadily growing and very stable recurring revenue stream for services. And, we're going through multiple revolutions like streaming content and then voice interaction. Now we're going into artificial intelligence, and Apple is doing a very good job at adapting to all these things. But the earnings power of Apple is very, very mature. So, the controversy, is it going to grow 5% or 7% next year? And so it's very difficult to have a strong conviction on the stock as long as you don't have more of a controversy. So, a simple answer would be for people to start worry about something for Apple I would not worry about, and then probably I would become a buyer.
Pierre, is there a reasonable, I guess there's a call out there that maybe Apple has missed, at least temporarily, the AI evolution. Is that a fair statement?
Well, from a technological standpoint, I would say, Apple Intelligence, the way Apple is articulating AI for their devices, I think is very sound and very good, and it's the right way to do it. But our view here is that Apple has to host AI and let AI mature and let AI, winning use cases emerge. And so it's going to be very non-disruptive to Apple. The business model of Apple is not going to change as we go through AI, even if Apple is probably going to be a major player in the adoption of AI.
Very quickly here, Pierre, you've got a humongous call on Microsoft. It was made some time ago. Do you reiterate a 570 target on Microsoft? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think Microsoft is in a very good place. Investors have been worried about Microsoft spending so much money on capex, so the free cash flow is coming down. And Tom, my history with TSMC. What I know a lot, and also my history with Tesla. I like a lot good businesses that are spending a lot of money on infrastructure, on PPEs, because if you have a good business, you make a good return on asset, and when you invest a lot, that means good returns are coming through. And so that's really the way I'm looking at Microsoft today. I'm thinking the business case of AI for them is very straightforward. It's like it's very easy to sell AI as an add-on. So they are going to make money out of all the investments they're doing today. Well, this is very, very bullish.
Never enough time. Pierre Ferragu, thank you so much. On Nvidia, on Apple, on Microsoft. Paul, even if I go out to the end of 26, out 14, 15, 16 months, Ferragu up 36%, 14% per year to year-end 26 on that 570 target.
Yeah, that's a strong bullish outlook there. But I'm looking at for Microsoft, 69 analysts follow the stock, 66 have a buy rating.
Yeah.
So there you go.
It's beloved, to say the least. I don't know what to make of that. I mean, if I do my first trade out of triple leveraged all cash, what do I do?
Jump right into it.
Warner Brothers Discovery?
Yeah, please.
Blue chip stock, something like that.
Buy more Microsoft.
Futures advance, up 11 on a Monday after economic data. The VIX under 16. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom. It is Bloomberg Business Flash. Positioning for lower borrowing costs rippling through the markets after Jerome Powell at the Fed said time has come to pivot to monetary easing. And there you have it, the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. And right out of the gate, Dow Jones Industrial Average up 48 points, a rise of 0.1%. S&P 500 right now 8 points higher. That is up about 0.1%. Still waiting for the first trades to take place with the NASDAQ right now. It is lower, down right now 11 points. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. So I'm traveling. Lisa's got the Gulfstream, and I'm coming back, and there's way too much time in airports and all that. And I'm looking through, like everybody else, I'm a zombie.
Yep.
I'm looking through Twitter, and there's some kid who was an intern looking for a job, and he goes, "These are the books I learned this summer at my internship. Eric, give me a job." And the first book on the list was, John Bogle. There's a movie coming out Memorial Day. Eric Belchunas joins us right now. I'm sure you saw that. I mean, the guy raved about your book. What's the distinction of your approach to what the great John Bogle did?
Yeah, it's good to get those reviews because it didn't make the New York Times bestseller list. But I did get a lot of sort of private DMs that, hey, man, this book was really great. You really captured the spirit of Jack. The reason I wrote the book, I wanted to give a Gen Xer's take on Bogle. Most books written about Bogle are by him or other very
Fossils.
older. Yeah. And I wanted to give the sort of more punk rock. This guy just really disrupted an entire financial system. He was like an anomaly in physics. And I also had the data. I've been seeing for years, Vanguard takes in like $1 billion a day. Right. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. So I had the data, and I had 3 multi-hour interviews with Bogle himself.
Critical.
Where I walked into his office and we immediately started debating. I mean, he loved to debate. And at the time, he's writing books, so he's got all this fund data. And I realized we had similar jobs. We're analyzing funds, and he's basically like, what's with all this BS in the ETF world? And I'm like, I'm defending it. So I realized we had some really meaty interviews that I was able to use.
This is just out, folks. I have not put it out on Twitter or LinkedIn. Robin Wigglesworth at the FT has the article I've been waiting for that goes back to William Sharp, and it's in your wheelhouse. In a world where financial engineers can churn out triple leverage, single stock ETFs, and bridge loan based SRTs, someone will eventually find a way to bottle and sell a cheap broad market portfolio. This is the heart of the frenzy right now, going back to Sharp in his classic paper of 64. What is going on in ETFs with this new chemistry?
Yeah, ironically, one of the Bogle effect was the name of my book. One of the effects is on active. The more passive becomes the core of portfolios, people kind of marry an index fund, the more people look for the extreme to pepper on top. They look for the exact opposite. That's why thematic ETFs are popular. That's why ARK became popular. That's why single stock leverage is popular. So this is, I think, a very small part of the portfolio. These ETFs have a little bit, not much in assets, so I don't worry about them too much. And if that keeps your hands busy while the 85-90% of your portfolio compounds over 30 years because you can't touch it, well, then it served a behavioral purpose. So it's more complicated than, hey, these products suck. I think the hot sauce wing of the ETF world is fine. It is legal to trade. I mean, look at all the derivatives out there that people can use. There's sports gambling. I mean, there's many ways to quickly lose your money in the world. I just think some of these ETFs are used for certain purposes. Say you have an S&P 500 exposure. Tesla's about to do earnings. You're just worried about this. You want to quickly short Tesla or hedge it out of your port. You can just buy the inverse Tesla. There are legit reasons to use it, but I probably think 80% is sort of degenerate speculating, no doubt. But it's a small part of the ETF market, but it is an ironic byproduct of the rise of passive.
And is the ETF market the corporate structure where there's just less than a handful of players that control most of the assets? Is that a good thing for the health of this industry and the growth of this industry?
So we have one of our big themes is the other guys. We even use a picture of the movie poster in my PowerPoints. The other guys are coming up strong. So last year, people not named BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street took in 45% of the flows. That was a record. 5 years ago, the other guys took in like 20%. The other guys now include Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Fidelity, Capital Group, right? These are big other guys, right? So the more these big powerhouse firms get into this, it will put a lid on the BlackRock's Vanguard. I think they're going to plateau. They'll get theirs, but I don't think they're going to grow much more than they are. But mind you, they're 65% of all the assets in ETFs. But I think they're going to plateau at that number, and they might even decrease a little bit. And back to Bogle, you know, one of the craziest things Bogle's ever said, that when I go on the road, I ask people, have you ever heard of a CEO saying this? He goes, I'll begin to know that Vanguard's mission is being accomplished when our market share erodes. Which is, and he said that in '93. This is before Vanguard even got as big as it did. He realized that he would force everyone else to get cheap and have more value, and then the other guys would start to get theirs, and Vanguard would, you know, plateau and eventually erode. And he rooted for that, which I just thought, again, that was part of the reason I was so drawn to him as a study. He's just so weird and different.
Yep. Where is the new money going as it goes to the JP Morgans and the Capitals? Is it going to just, you know, plain vanilla index stuff, or is it some of the more esoteric?
Well, you look at the top two ETFs this year, VU and IVV, S&P 500, 102 billion between them. That's a lot. That's 1/5 of all the money going in is just those two. But then you go down the list. IBIT, the Bitcoin ETF, is 4th. Yep. The Qs is 5th. Then you get into SPLG. That's another S&P. And then you get something like the DYNF is a multi-factor ETF. You go down the list. There are some things that deviate from beta, but largely a lot of the flows go to cheap beta.
In next year, I will have a theme. Right now, my theme is corporations adjust. I'm going to stay with that because I think that's what they're doing. The Dow up 131 points. Eric Balchunas, I see a redux of buy the index. We'll bring in some premium by writing calls or some other derivative structure. And so instead of making 15 basis points on an ETF, we're going to charge you whatever, you know the number better than me. Haven't we seen this before?
Yeah, this is the covered call that, you know, JP Morgan has the biggest active equity ETF, JEPI, and it does what you say. It writes call options. And people, older investors in particular, they've got a ton of money, but not a lot of time. So they're willing to give up some of the upside to get a little buffer at the bottom. So the big income you get there, 9-10% from the premium, it does buffer the downside, but you miss the surges up. So you have to give up that upside. There is a huge market for people willing to give up upside to protect their downside. And so that's really what this is.
Well, what's the study of that from you and your team seriously here?
Yeah, so
does it work? Do you make 7% net clean?
We call it boomer candy, but we had a note saying that you can get cavities.
Oh boy.
Is going full with the dental theme here. But what you have to know is that last year, which was a pretty good year in the market, the ones that yield the most, the ETFs that yielded the most, were in the least, the bottom decile of performers. So you, again, giving up that upside can be painful. You can be in the bottom half of the performers in a really good year. And still, though, JEPI takes in money. So I think the psychological benefit of knowing your downside is buffered. JEPI, JEPI.
Oh,
believe it or not, that's the biggest active equity ETF in the world. And, by the way, JP Morgan is taking in more active flows, mutual fund ETF, than anyone else in the past year. Fidelity's too. JP Morgan is like the new active powerhouse out there. They have the biggest bond active fixed income ETF as well, JPST. But these are all priced pretty moderately. JEPI's 35 bips and JPST, I believe, is 13 bips. So as an advisor, you're like, hey, look, I'm getting JP Morgan's brand name. Yeah. They're doing all this legwork. It's 35 bips. They're just charging me really for the active. I feel like I'm getting a good deal. I'm in. And I think that's what you have to do. You have to make advisors feel like they're getting a good deal.
12-month yield 7.1%, net indicated yield 5.97%. Come on, that's all this is about, is I'm picking up 200, 300 basis points off treasuries, right?
Yeah, like I said, a lot of time, like there's a lot of people out there, like whether it's the buffer products or the covered call, just buy a 60-40 or get a diversified portfolio. Right. That's the old school tends to be a very positive way to do this. The only, Tom, one quick thing. The aggregate bond index went down in 2022, 13%. Stocks were down 17%. That really scared people that bonds can go down with stocks. This is why all this is happening, in my opinion. If bonds don't work, what are you going to do?
We're going to push out 15 seconds. Are you working Friday?
No, I'm going to be on the panhandle of Florida.
Nice.
In the water.
There you
88 degrees ocean temperature.
Some of the nicest
so it's like a
beaches
bath.
anywhere.
Like you got to wonder about hurricanes.
Exactly.
Looks pretty clear. We're good.
Okay, see ya. Michael Barr's got to get in there. Eric Balchunas, thank you so much. Can't say enough about his work. He's got 2 books out, folks. We're busting his chops, but these books are deep and important if you're using exchange-traded funds for investment. Every time he walks in, I learn something.
I mean, he's in my mind, the leading voice on ETFs.
Right.
Everything I know, it's from this guy and his research.
He has 3 interns.
I know.
I mean, we don't have 3. We have
Fine.
2. I don't know.
He's a player.
He's
a player.
And
And
he
he
made
trains
it
up. He takes the Acela up from Philadelphia.
He made it on time today.
Yeah, it's all about the Acela. If Acela's late, we don't get Balchunas.
He's not as reliable as Michael Barr.
No.
I mean,
day in, day out, he
honest,
drives in from Eastern Ohio.
He is.
Exactly.
On the edge of Cleveland.
Yep.
The Dow up 139 points. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign says it raised $82 million during the Democratic convention last week, bringing her total to $540 million since President Biden left the race last month. Bloomberg's Laura Davison has more from Washington.
Even the Trump campaign put out a memo over the weekend that says they expect that she'll get a polling bump of about 2 to 3 points. So we'll see those polls start to trickle in this week on how she's doing. But this is a really unprecedented race in the way that she only has to run really going forward for about 2 months before Election Day.
Bloomberg's Laura Davison. This week, Harris and her running mate Tim Walz plan to tour Georgia Wednesday and Thursday. Former President Trump is planning a speech on the economy Thursday and events in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania at the end of the week. Boeing has suffered a new setback in its space ambitions. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter reports the company was snubbed for the return mission of NASA astronauts.
NASA says the continued struggles are causing it to finally decide to not have the Starliner bring them back, but instead wait until February and come back by SpaceX. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson says safety.
The decision to keep Butch and Sonny aboard the International Space Station and bring the Boeing Starliner home uncrewed is a result of a commitment to safety.
This leaves Boeing's new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, with a question of how committed Boeing will remain, knowing the costs that might be ahead. It has not been a good year for Boeing. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
There's a product recall involving the nation's biggest retailer. Walmart is recalling some 10,000 cases of Great Value brand apple juice sold in 25 states and the District of Columbia. The 6 packs of 8-ounce juice bottles contain elevated arsenic levels. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg Tom, Paul, John.
I felt old this weekend.
Really?
John and Liz had their 50th anniversary. How rare is that nowadays? Friends of mine.
Oh, okay.
50th. Very, very cool.
Good for them.
It's extremely rare.
That
You know,
is.
it's
Good for them.
You know, I sort of have in my head, like, what was my parents' 50th anniversary? They didn't make it, but a lot of people say that.
Good for them.
Used to be like a normal thing,
Yeah.
and now it's like a real state
It is. Yeah, it gets your
of
attention.
time. They have well-behaved children.
Not even better.
You know, even better.
Mhm.
I think they have more horses than children.
Okay.
They did
What
well.
is 50? Gold, silver,
I
diamonds?
think Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. Nice.
All right.
Congratulations to John and Elizabeth for their 50th wedding anniversary. Let's go around the room here. Who's going to make it here? I don't-
Sorry.
Well, since I'm on my
Well,
third
if you add
one.
all Michael's up and all yours up, that's 50.
Barr's working on it. Dow up 130 points. Congratulations to John and Elizabeth for that. From New York City, Nvidia on Wednesday, Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. After Friday's rally, major averages right now, they are mixed. The number to watch on the S&P 500, 5667. That was the record set back in mid-July. Right now, you have 8 of the 11 major industry groups in the S&P 500 higher, and energy, that is the best performing group as crude oil rockets higher, up over 2%. Goldman's Scott Rubner back watching for an all-time high for the S&P 500. Likely this week, he says, which he expects means that the fear of missing out is going to increase for investors. Traders also anticipating Nvidia's results, earnings after the close on Wednesday. And ExxonMobil forecasts that global oil demand in 2050 is going to be the same or even slightly higher than current levels. That would put efforts to reach net zero carbon emissions by mid-century well out of reach if they're right. S&P 500 right now 9 points higher, up 0.2%, 5643 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 148 points. That is up 0.4%. And the NASDAQ 100, 55 points lower, down 0.3%. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Well, John Tucker, thanks so much. We had Gina Martin Adams on the markets, important. But this is, across this nation, the conversation of the moment on the capture of rental housing by institutions. And joining us is hugely qualified, the former economist of Fannie Mae with tangible work at the Federal Reserve System. Brad Case joins us of Middleburg Communities, working out of the Washington, D.C. area. You studied under Schiller at Yale.
Yes, I did.
What was that like?
Oh, it was great. It wasn't just Schiller. I had another very good advisor there, Will Getzman at the business school.
Yeah.
Very qualified, both of them. I actually also had some good advice from Susan Wachter at the Wharton School. So I built on the shoulders of some pretty stunning economists.
Exactly. All three of those have participated with Bloomberg Surveillance, particularly Professor Schiller, and they know that you can have belief in a system, but then the system breaks. A lot of our listeners feel the rental market in America is breaking by institutional ownership. Blackstone gets the most ill will, but there's many others. How is Middleburg doing rental housing given the public's fear of capture by institutions?
Well, I think that fear is much overblown, but you have to remember that you have to keep in mind that the rental housing market is segmented into different pieces. One of them is what we do, which is multifamily communities and single-family rental communities. What someone like Blackstone tends to do is more scattered site, single-family rental houses. What they're doing, though, is providing professional management to an asset class that's always been there, but it's always been amateurly managed, by the guy 2 blocks away who does this on the side and may or may not come when your toilet breaks. So what we are doing is providing the same level of professional management and amenities that you would get in a multifamily community, but we're providing it to people who want 4 walls and a lawn. So I think it's a major improvement in the sort of menu of options that households have in case they don't want to buy a house now or ever. And certainly right now is a difficult time to be doing that. So the idea of being able to rent a professionally managed, amenitized house sounds good to them.
I guess what we've all come to learn or understand maybe more clearly over the last number of years is that there's a residential shortage of units in this country. How did we get here?
Well, you have to remember that most of the policy that affects the supply of housing, whether it's rental or owner-occupied, is set at the local level. And it's set by people who don't want there to be much housing because they are currently homeowners and they want something that'll jack up the value of their house. So they basically want the renters to be paying for them to become wealthier through the ownership of that house. What we are trying to do is to provide more housing, and it's not the capital markets that prevent that from happening, because even when interest rates are generally high, good rental housing projects will still get funding. What really prevents the provision of housing is local opposition to the development of new housing.
When you do the microeconomics, let's pretend you went to Chicago and you did the price theory of our housing dynamic, a lot of amateurs like me would say, well, it's a tax shield that you get from a mortgage deduction when you own a house. Go through, I mean, Krugman did a beautiful essay on this years ago. Go through the Marshallian economics of how I'm not getting taken to the cleaners when I rent versus own.
Because it turns out that what's most important is that when you buy a house, you have to put a gigantic amount of money into an asset that appreciation is very low. If instead you rent a place, whether it's a house or an apartment,
you can go invest somewhere else.
You put that money into the stock market, and that is a much better investment.
So when Paul Sweeney, John Bon Jovi wants to sell his mansion out in New Jersey. You want to buy it.
Sure.
And they go $18 million, and you do in your head the math. You go, oh my God, they made so much money. And then you get the HP 12C out, and let's say they grossed 4.5% over 20 years. Then you take out of that all the expenses along the way.
Yep.
Is real estate equivalent to the stock market?
Oh God, no. No, the total returns on real estate are much, much lower than in the stock market. And I've actually done this analysis with data going back to the early 1970s. Most of the time, people are better off renting than owning in terms of building wealth.
Paul, this is critical insight that we've got here. Peter Lynch went mental at Fidelity one day, and he did the same study without Case's academics and came up with the same conclusion.
Who knows? I'm back in the ownership game myself. Middleburg communities, where do you guys like to develop? Where do you see the best returns?
We are active in the Southeast and the Mid-Atlantic, basically from Maryland to Florida, plus Tennessee and Alabama. Very, very happy right now with Richmond, Virginia, and a couple of the coastal smaller markets, Wilmington, North Carolina, very attractive.
And that's, all Tom and John and I have seen since the pandemic is everybody's leaving the New Yorks of the world and going down to that part of the world. So what's that meant for your businesses down there?
Oh, the demand growth is just astonishing. And it's not just people moving from other parts of the country to the Southeast and the Mid-Atlantic. It's also people forming households. And they're forming a new household. They want to get their own place,
right.
Whether it's buying or renting. And the fact that more and more of them want to do it in our part of the country is just gravy.
One final question. This has been great. Don't be a stranger. Let's go all Getzman right now. He's fabulous on public policy. What's your single point advice to Trump or Harris on this housing disaster of America?
It's all about supply. It's all about not making it cheap to build housing, but making it easy to build housing that makes economic sense, even with interest rates that are normal, that are where they should be.
Doable?
Absolutely. Absolutely. All you have to do is start to pare away the garbage that goes along with it. Garbage like the possibility that rents will be controlled, but not house prices. I mean, that's kind of an absurd public policy situation that we're in. We need a situation where renting makes sense for the renters and for the people who are building it.
We got to go. I got 8 more questions.
Yeah, I know you're thinking about.
I want to ask him about Tucker's kitchen. Tucker's got the $250,000 granite counter thing going. I mean, that goes into housing as well. Please don't be a stranger.
I will be glad to come back.
From Yale University with all of that heritage, Middleburg communities. Brad Case, their chief economist there. There is no bigger topic, frankly. It's bigger than Nvidia.
It's big. I mean, it's just, you think about it. How do we get to the spot where we do have these housing issues, and nobody's getting out of their existing home, Tom, because they're sitting on a 3 or 4% mortage, and if they want to go out and buy something new, it's going to be a 6-handle. So
I love that. Eric, home run, getting Brad Case in here. We'll do it again. From Middleburg, communities, huge controversy over rental in America. Red and green in the screen, but it's mostly green. Dow up 0.4%. Up 177 points. That level, 41,354. SPX, I'm not in the 5,700 watch yet. 5641, up 6 points, up fractionally. NASDAQ 100 goes the wrong way. I have no idea why. The VIX 16.04. Quiescent. We did a commercial with me saying quiescent.
Really?
I don't even know. I don't know how to spell it.
Oh, I love it, though. It works.
I don't know how to spell it.
You're not going to hear John Tucker or me doing that. But
it's the last week of August. Tell your kids to get out of bed.
Back to school.
Peter Tosh. Good morning.